found in most companies. And this is the LG's clear differentiation. Thank you. Now, let me take you to LG's AI brain. The AI brain of LG that we envision is a powerful engine with orchestrated processes. It starts from focusing customer needs through interactive conversation or contextual behavior.
It was Germany's most produced tank, with 8,500 during the entire war, and the role to liberate countries from themselves. It was a very reliable vehicle and stayed relevant all the way up to the 1967 six-day intense but brief disagreement between Israel and its neighbors. While it wouldn't be Germany's best tank, it was overall the best design for the various needs of the German army. The Leopard 2 is Germany's current.
Wix is your platform to perform on. A complete portfolio solution means you can tell your unique story with confidence. From choosing a name and design that fits your vision, to bringing your projects to life. Custom themes and layouts. Find tunable details and tons of animation options. Deliver an immersive experience. Spend less time on admin with live chat, forms, a detailed contact database, and one.
Tensions are continuing to rise in the Middle East. The U.S. carried out additional strikes, targeting now receiving military and this certainly seems like a ramp up by the U.S. and its allies. We saw what took place on Thursday, and now we're seeing more attacks and more targets. What can you show us? So these are the latest attacks. So what we used was the platform of the USS Columbia, which is a cruise Tomahawk missiles on board. So they fired the Tomahawk land attack missiles, as they're called, TLAMs, to go after the radar facility, which is actually near the capital of Sana'a. This was different from earlier attacks, which had a multi-nation coalition that was basically part of it. From a military perspective, was the UK. The rest of these countries supported this effort. Everyone from Australia to Bahrain, the Arab nation, was Canada, the Netherlands supported this effort as part of the operation protecting us as a city. And what about the a lot of folks at home might be wondering, okay, how many targets might you have when it comes to going after this? And we heard 6 judging by that, I would find it surprising that there would be additional targets after that. But we shouldn't take this lightly. I mean, this is a quasi state almost. And you're talking about the Houthis are actually really and from a perspective, what's interesting is actually called. This is where all that traffic, all that sea traffic goes through from the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean all the way up to the Suez Canal. And all of these military bases that are in all of these areas, those are all legitimate targets because what they do, Jim, is they provide a place for the Houthis to launch the kinds of attacks that they can use these kinds of weapons, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and long-range drones. And those are pretty important weapons. Yeah, and this is why they have been such a menace to shipping vessels in the Red Sea.
Absolutely.
Been going on for weeks.
So it has, and one of the key things that is part of this is that 20%, and there's been 20% reduction in shipping activity. Major shipping firms like Maersk, for example, have actually moved their shipments from the Red Sea to go around Africa because those the rerouting actually forces them to about 3,000 nautical miles and extra days, about 8 to 10 days longer in a journey that otherwise would be a lot shorter for between the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. So this is really important from an economic standpoint, from a military and geopolitical standpoint.
Yeah, no, obviously a lot more expensive to go all the way around as opposed to straight to the Red Sea. All right, Colonel Leahy, very important, very insightful as always. Thanks so much. Opera GX. Trying to play a game while you're watching your favorite YouTuber on the side. The game starts lagging because the 2040 web browser is hogging all your resources. Is allowed to call the prosecutor a deranged thug. She said, I've never seen that in any other criminal case, and I'm not going to allow you to do it, Mr. Trump. And she actually said that some of this rhetoric that Trump has been engaging in on social media has the potential to lead to violence. That was very concerning. She said he's attacking. She didn't include herself, as far as we can tell, in that. She said, I'm a big girl, I can take this, essentially. We'll see it in the written word. But she's definitely giving it a lot of leeway because she knows this is going to be appealed, probably all the way to the Supreme Court. Rights to engage in political speech as a man. And you talk about her threatening Nato, her essentially saying, listen, just because you're running for president, just because you're running for office, doesn't mean you get to say every language, every word in the English language however you want, right? Like you are also facing this indictment, and that's the point she's making. That's right, and his lawyers pointed out that when you say someone should be executed, that is not technically a legal threat. But when Donald Trump said the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff deserved the death penalty, that has a wider meaning. It reaches a larger audience, and we saw after he engaged in some rhetoric, the woman called and threatened this very judge and was arrested for doing that. So his speech has had consequences. He's going to be on the campaign trail a fair amount. We know a lot, quite a bit, end of this year, beginning of next year with Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, all coming up. What happens if at a campaign rally he does, in fact, violate the terms that we just laid out here? Now, that's a very interesting question. She raised the possibility of sanctions, of fines, and even of jail. But the idea of jailing a former president running for president for his speech, that's a big, big deal. Ken Delaney, and thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. A lot more to get to when we come back, including some businesses, some schools, some celebrities taking some heat over taking a stance on the Israel-Hamas war. But some of that pushback looks like and how social media is involved. Tonight, tens of thousands of people are signing a petition demanding Columbia University fire a professor after he called Hamas's brutal terror attack against Israelis, and I'm quoting here, a stunning victory. The professor made those comments in an article posted online just a day after the attack. The Columbia student who started that petition speaking with the team not too long ago. Listen.
Regardless of what you believe about this current conflict,
It's a forgotten game of
It was the greatest sport ever played. I was lucky enough to be its announcer from 1991 to 2020.
man. You all saw me out there dominating. You saw the way I wouldn't catch the ball to save my life. As soon as the ball hit, before they can even think about tackling me.
Buck was one of the greatest in this or any era. In 11 seasons, he was only smeared once. A game where only the strongest survive. You know, when I was a kid, my father would take us to Cranbow Field every Saturday. Those players were like gods to us, you know? I used to sit and watch them play, and I dream of going pro like them someday myself. I did that until the league went under. Sorry, Pop.
For an NBC News special report as we bring you the fifth public hearing of the January 6th committee from Washington, D.C. We know three former senior DOJ officials, including the former acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen, are all scheduled to testify today. All three of them met with the former President Donald Trump in the Oval Office on January 3rd. NBC Nightly News anchor Lester Holt picks up our coverage right now. This is an NBC News special report. The results of a year-long investigation into the January 6th attack. Day 5 of the unprecedented congressional hearings. President Trump tried to force out over his false election fraud claims.
He's become detached from reality. If he really believes this stuff.
As the committee tries to prove that the former president was responsible.
Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack.
New evidence set to be revealed today as the January 6th committee makes its case to the American people. Here now is Lester Holt. Good day, everyone. Did former President Trump pressure the nation's top law enforcement agency to help overturn the 2020 election? The focus of today's hearing of the January 6th committee under the microscope, the Department of Justice, and whether Donald Trump, along with a high-ranking DOJ member, plotted to get some states to decertify votes. We'll hear testimony about that and a potential scheme to shake up staffing within the department in order to advance Trump's fraudulent claims about winning the election. Just when we thought the committee would be wrapping up these hearings in a matter of days, development, with so much new information being uncovered, the committee chairman says he's pressing pause, delaying the next 2 hearings until sometime next month. Why? It's to sift through what one panel member calls a mountain of new information centered on how the former president directed protesters toward the Capitol on January 6th and failed to control the violent mob. We'll be discussing that new evidence, which includes never-before-seen film footage of the First Family and Vice President Pence. We'll tell you where it came from and what it could mean for building a case against the former president. We'll get to all that, but first we focus on what lies ahead today, and that's a lot. We begin with NBC Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haig. Garrett, Tuesday's testimony focused on how election officials were harassed and even threatened in some states. Tell us more about what to expect as the focus now shifts to the Department of Justice.
Lester, today's hearing will have 2 main thrusts along that point. The first will be the effort by the Trump administration, the committee will claim, to pressure top DOJ leaders to come up with an investigation, or at least look like they were conducting an investigation into the claims of voter fraud that Trump had been making around the country. This hearing will be quarterbacked, if you will, by Republican Adam Kinzinger, and I had a chance to discuss with him yesterday how he sees this portion of their case shaping up. Here's what he told me. So is it fair to say that the president was trying to use the DOJ?
I think that's very fair to say. I think it's fair to say that the president really wanted the stamp of doubt that comes with the DOJ seal.
We are seeing a systemic attack on children from every pillar of culture: academia, the entertainment industry, the gender ideology, all attacking our children at one time. My name is Landon Starbuck, and this is my story. I'm a mother, an advocate, and the founder of a nonprofit combating child exploitation in America called Freedom Forever. I was born in Dallas, Texas, and I was the only child. My parents divorced when I was 5.
So part 1 of this hearing then is from the DOJ to open up investigation or investigations into these claims of voter fraud. Part 2 is what happens after our witnesses today, 3 top former DOJ officials, refused to do so. And that is, the committee will outline an effort to replace the head of the DOJ with a more compliant figure, a man named who was an environmental lawyer and who the committee believes there was a full-fledged scheme to have take control of the DOJ. Instead, there was something of a revolt among top DOJ officials and staffers saying they would not serve under Clark, and so that portion of the president's plan was never put into action. But that is what the committee intends to lay out today in broad strokes, Lester.
All right, Garrett, thank you. Joining me here now, my colleague Sally Jackson, our senior Washington correspondent, and Chuck Todd, and moderator of Meet the Press. Thanks for both being here. Chuck, start us off. What are you looking for today? What's important to key on?
Well, look, this is meddling at the Justice Department, and if we talk about all the parallels to Watergate, this is probably the most direct parallel to Watergate in the this Saturday Night Massacre where then President Nixon essentially wanted the people investigating him fired, and he needed the Attorney General to be compliant. So obviously it was a different thing he was looking for, but this was a case where it looks like this is what Donald Trump's going to do. And there have been sort of, look, there's no laws here that say a president can, they work for the president. He could have done this. He was within his constitutional rights, but there's been this accepted practice post-Watergate that, Bill Clinton wanted to fire his prosecutor a bunch of times, but he couldn't. He didn't. Politically, he wouldn't touch Anna Rita at that time, and it didn't happen. So today, I think this is how he tried to essentially use the government and the credibility of the Justice Department to give more. Here in some of these snippets we've seen the reporting, he simply wanted the announcement. Give me the press release, I'll spin it. I think it
We'll do the rest.
We'll do the rest is what it was. So this, I think the most shocking part of this scheme is that Donald Trump decided not to do it. And that's the part of this that I think has always been, and this is to charge him with something over time. I think Mr. Clark's in a lot more potential legal trouble than on this case than Mr. Trump, because he didn't pull the trigger. But it does seem as if he was close. And the more I've learned about this, the more I'm still personally surprised he didn't go through with it.
Well, Hallie, all these hearings have really been a story of a president who's walking at least right whether he crossed it in a major kind of a way. What are you looking for?
I'm looking for that, Lester. These are people who were in conversations with the president, and I imagine we'll hear about a couple of them end of December, again in early January, in the room with him, with, in some cases, his top White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, other people who were key to President's inner circle at the time. At any point, did Donald Trump acknowledge that what he was doing, he knew would violate the law in the way that they were describing, right? So I think that's what we're here. I think when you look broadly at this, a lot of the conversations that we're going to hear have been reported, frankly, by our outlets, by the New York Times, the Washington Post, others, right? But what I think is going to be critical here is listening to the storyline as it weaves together. Think about, for lack of a better word, the characters that we're going to meet today. In some ways, this is a tale of two Jeffs, Jeffrey Clark and Jeffrey Rosen, right? Jeffrey Clark, this environmental lawyer, that was his background, who was introduced to the president, connected to the president, reportedly through a Republican member of Congress, who I think we'll hear more about and who we'll talk more about, who backed the president's live election fraud, essentially, was sympathetic to that, to the point where Jeffrey Clark even wrote a letter, 5-page letter, describing ways that he thought that Donald Trump could, in the state of Georgia, for example, push back against the legitimate election results. Jeffrey Rosen and the other witnesses we're going to hear from, Richard Donahue and Stephen Engel, they were pushing hard against the president the other way, right? Involved in these meetings saying, if you do this, if you put Jeffrey Clark in charge, we're out. We're done, we quit, right? And these people are interesting. We talked a lot about Jeff Rosen, right? The one-time acting attorney general, who was only in that job for about a month after
By the way,
Clark
that
died.
is a mystery, and we're not solving, but Bill Barr's never given us the full explanation of why he decided to quit early. We all have an idea. He didn't want to have to tell the president no.
And the relationship deteriorated pretty badly.
Well, he did, but he also decided to walk away. Right. He also decided to walk away because he knew what he might be asked to do next. That position. It is still the fact that Barr left Jeffrey Rosen in this something that I think needs a little more exploration than he's been able to.
So you have Rosen, he's going to be one of the live witnesses. You have a guy named Richard Donahue, who, by the way, we know took notes about some of these meetings, handwritten notes.
By the way, most lawyers, you ever met a lawyer that
I was going to say, typical for fascinating notes, right? Because he's describing the things that Donald Trump was saying in these conversations. I'd be shocked if that doesn't come up in the hearing today. I think we can show you some of the notes he took where he describes pieces of the conversation where the former president, Chuck, to your point, said exactly that. All I need is for you to, and I'm paraphrasing here, is to make the announcement. Republican congressman, he says, to say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman, is what Donahue says the president said. And then
irregularities or whatever, anything out of the Justice Department found.
I'm also interested in Stephen Engel, who is the former Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel at the DOJ. Not a household name. I think that's fair to say, right? Not somebody who is at the center of a lot of the discussion in the lead up to January 6th and in the months after. This is somebody who, though, was on, for example, the Supreme Court long list from President Trump at the time when he was in office back in September of 2020, in case there had been an opening, etc. He is somebody who is a well-respected attorney who was also in these meetings. And that is interesting because there hasn't been a lot of public reporting about what he has had to say or what he saw and heard. So I think there's a lot of threads to pull on, but that's at least where I'm starting myself.
All right, let me go to our Washington correspondent, Yamiche Alcindor. She's with us. Today's hearing might be the most impactful so far. Why do you think that?
Well, they might be one of the most impactful so far because you're going to hear directly from Department of Justice officials about their direct conversations with President Trump. There's been a lot said of sort of what people might have heard or what people thought, but the fact that these are going to be the people who were in the room with the president. We heard, of course, from people who had been on calls with the president, but these are going to be people who know firsthand just how far former President Trump was willing to go. And I think issues that are at hand, you've talked about at the table, but there's also this key word of pardons. Representative Scott Perry and a number of Republican lawmakers were accused, and lawmakers say, of trying to seek pardons after January 6th, and even in some cases in the days before January 6th, because they were worried about the activities that they had taken part in. So I think it's going to be very interesting to learn sort of what talk about that. What role possibly could the Department of Justice have had in that? I also think, of course, Jeffrey Clark is going to be fascinating to hear about because we heard, of course, about his involvement in the 5-page letter that he wrote, a draft letter about what the DOJ could do and how it could possibly just tell states not to continue counting votes or to possibly overturn the 2020 election. But also, Jeffrey Clark was someone who had this sort of really meeting in the Oval Office where his bosses, one of them not even being able to wear a suit, he was out walking apparently, Richard Donahue, and had to run to the White House to try to convince former President Trump not to put Jeffrey Clark in charge. One other thing, the politics of this are going to be something that I'm going to be watching because we know now that the Biden administration is under a lot of pressure to be more aggressive, rather, with Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, in trying to push him to prosecute more people in connection with the January 6th investigation. And there are some Democrats who totally crazy. They want the DOJ to be doing more. So the White House has been over and over again that they're not going to be pressured into doing what they think their predecessors did, which was treating the DOJ as their personal legal arm. Instead, President Biden has said, I'm going to allow the DOJ to be very, very independent of me. I think that's the politics of this is going to be really interesting to see because of the juxtaposition of these two administrations.
All right, Yamiche, thank you. I want to bring in our NBC News legal analyst and criminal defense attorney, Danny Savalas. Danny, we have heard a lot about Bill Barr. He's had a lot of airtime, if you will, in these hearings. We're going to talk about him probably again today. He has been kind of positioned as the guy that stood up early and said, Mr. President, these votes aren't here, these fraudulent votes are here. What should we know as we continue to watch him use it?
For the last week, Bill Barr has gotten a kind of a pass, and it's probably because he may have the most memorable line to date in these proceedings. And I won't repeat it here, Lester, don't worry. But it starts with a B, and it went around the world, and people saw that as Bill Barr standing up to Trump. And that has held for about a week. I think that's going to change today, and I'll tell you why. Because we are probably going to hear about things like a memorandum that Bill Barr issued that we reported on back when it came out that essentially said, look, if there's some real obvious indications of election, then you, DOJ, can investigate it, which many people in the DOJ, in the public integrity, they pushed back. People did not agree with this memorandum. Now, I think Bill Barr positions it in the very language of the memo, is that he's slow walking it, as if he's doing the bare minimum. Well, look, I probably shouldn't look into this, but I'll just issue a memo that says, hey, if you see something glaring, look into it, but otherwise, don't do much. In the Georgia situation with the suitcases of votes, conduct some interviews, talk to some people, and then do that, and then be done with it. So Bill Barr may position this as, hey, I just did the bare minimum. I wasn't really carrying out Trump's We're going to hear a slightly different story, and it will be really the ones who stood up are going to be folks like Rosen and Donahue, who apparently, according to the evidence, stood up the entire time, never gave an inch, and when it came to things like sending out letters about canceling out electors, they said, heck no, we're not doing that. No chance.
And to Chuck's point, the president didn't go through.
He didn't go
through it. So I
wonder how his allies will stay off, right? I mean, that's something you hear from those folks.
So where does intent, if you're looking at this through a purely legal lens. Where does intent play?
In law, we have a thing called inchoate or incomplete crimes. That's crimes like attempt or conspiracy, where the actual eventual crime may not even be carried out. But as a matter of public policy, we punish the just as much often as we do the completed crime itself. You don't want to reward people for being really lousy at committing crimes or maybe changing their mind at the end. So, to me, what I'm going to be looking for is the requisite intent, not whether or not this was actually completed. The mere fact that Trump asks and is told it's wrong and then apparently asks again and again based on really nothing that we've seen other than, and I'm quoting some prior witnesses, theories and not evidence. I think that's going to be critical here. And there comes a point where intent is assumed if somebody continues on in the face of knowledge or information that what they are doing is wrong. And I think that's what the committee's trying to build here.
I guess the question I have is what did he do illegally in this situation? Because he had the authority to hire and fire everybody that was in that Oval Office.
That's right. So that's the problem with this, is that it doesn't fit neatly into definitions of crimes. And it's really easy for someone like me to stand up here and look at the crimes code and say, oh, this could be conspiracy to defraud the United States, right? Or this could even just be mail fraud because something went in the mail. But it's an entirely different thing where you have a totally unprecedented set of facts and a totally unprecedented is quite different. It reminds us of the Saturday Night Massacre, but it is factually a lot different. I would argue that the efforts are even more documented and more severe than they were in the case of the Saturday Night Massacre. And of course, as you pointed out, you don't have DOJ officials actually leaving. They're just threatening to leave. And you have this Jeffrey Clark figure who's going to be like an Iago figure today, scheming behind the scenes to get the job. And to Jeffrey Rosen and saying, look, it's a real nice job you have at the DOJ. If you want to keep it, if you send out these letters, then maybe I don't want the job so much.
Janie, do you think we'll have a better idea of why Barr left early?
No, and I think that's something everybody wants to know. Why, and why at that moment? Why so close to the end, and why just essentially moments
We all
before all
want to
these
spend more
other
time
things
with our
happen?
family.
Sure, we all want to spend more time with our family. That's a fine enough reason. But why not finish it out? Why leave when he did? Will we ever get an answer to that? I don't think
he
we
knew
will
what
today.
was happening.
He knew the
He
entire
knew
time.
what was going to be. He had already dealt with some of it. I find this to be there's a lot of little unsolved side mysteries. This is one that it feels like I didn't feel like we got a great explanation even in this book.
Well, and I just remember I was covering the White House at the time, and I was talking to people who were close to Bill Barr at the time when the speculation was, is he going to leave? Is he going to leave? And these folks would tell me things like, well, he feels like he can do his job right now. His relationship was obviously deteriorating with Donald Trump at the time. But Chuck, this is a guy, Lester, you interviewed him. He wrote a book about the experience. He's talked extensively in multiple interviews about that experience, and that is still one of those outstanding questions.
Yeah, let me go to NBC News national security correspondent Ken Delaney, and he's live at the Justice Department. Ken, we're going to hear a lot more about Jeffrey Clark today. We probably won't hear anything, though, about the visit that he received from federal agents.
That's right, Lester. You've been talking about how Jeffrey Clark and his activities will be, in many ways, the centerpiece of this hearing we're about to watch. But we learned a few hours ago that Jeffrey Clark's home was visited yesterday by a number of federal law enforcement agents. The government is being rather circumspect about what exactly happened. An official just said there was some law enforcement activity at Jeffrey Clark's Virginia home. But Jeffrey Clark's boss, who's a former Trump administration official, has said in a statement that this was essentially a pre-dawn raid by a dozen federal agents who took Jeffrey Clark out of his home in his pajamas and seized his electronic devices. If that characterization is correct, Lester, it suggests these agents had obtained a search warrant, which means they convinced the judge that there was probable cause to believe that a crime was occurring. Now, often a search warrant in such cases would be served if they believe or destroying evidence that otherwise could have been obtained by a subpoena. And this is a huge development in this investigation, this parallel investigation that is being run by the Justice Department out of that building behind me into what happened here in terms of efforts to overturn the election. Doubly significant because, as we're going to hear today, almost everything that Jeffrey Clark was doing and talking about in terms of scheming to overturn this election, he was discussing with the then President of the United States, Donald Trump. And
Had he succeeded in some of these schemes, it could have been a much different result. One of the things he was trying to do is get the Justice Department to send letters to various states saying that the Justice Department had found fraud in the election, when in fact the Justice Department had found no such thing. But had those letters gone out, it could have emboldened people who wanted to install false electors and really change the game. So this is a very close call. We're going to hear these Trump-appointed Justice Department officials did the right thing when it mattered and said no to this stuff and threatened to resign. But the theory of the case was outlined by Liz Cheney when she gave her like dramatic opening statement at the beginning of all these hearings, which is that there was a conspiracy here that she argues is criminal. She used the word corrupt many times to overthrow the election. That whether they succeeded or not does not matter. That the conspiracy still existed and should be investigated.
And are the DOJ and the committee playing well together here?
Well, there were some reports in recent days that the DOJ was asking for transcripts that the committee hand over, but my understanding is that they are playing well together. There are a lot of federal prosecutors working for this, former federal prosecutors working for this January 6th committee, people who have worked in this building behind me, who know how this works. They want to conduct a thorough investigation, but they don't appear to intend in any way to be hiding anything or keeping anything from the Justice Department. There are logistical issues, but those can be worked out.
Ken, thanks very much. And Chuck, there seems to be one of the subplots is the pressure on DOJ. As this stuff unfolds and people's jaws are dropping, they look to DOJ. Well, what are you going to do about it?
Look, it has been notable that since the start of these hearings, the Department of Justice has let us know about a bunch of new things they've been doing with their investigation. Is this a way for Garland to sort of answer some of the criticism, whispers from the Hill, whispers from the White House? Because all of a sudden you see subpoenas being issued, you see a phone being seized from a Nevada Republican Party chair, the Georgia Republican Party chair, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, the Department of Justice feels like it's suddenly getting more aggressive. Look, it is, I think the reason why the committee's been so frustrated, and I've been talking with some of the committee members, is that they feel as if, they've been pedal to the metal in their investigation. They feel as if justice opened the investigation. They have focused on the act of January 6th and have been aggressive there, but they've sort of been, they're looking at the larger issue of electors and they're looking at this stuff, but it has not felt urgent. And all of a sudden, the last 2 weeks, it's come across as a sense of urgency. I do think that if you're Merrick Garland and you walk through the sort of, if you're eventually going to make a decision, whatever you decide to do with Trump, you better have sort of explored every facet of this investigation. And so, for instance, if he's going to come to the conclusion that he's not going to indict Trump, but he is going to indict all these people around him, he needs to be doing what we're seeing now, which is, look, I've looked at every avenue that I can't get a prosecution of him, but I can get a prosecution of these 6 people. And that's my sense of what I think is the larger picture here that Garland's.
Hallie, the last hearing a couple of days ago, it got emotional. It was personal.
Yeah.
A poll worker talking about the President of the United States. Trez, what we see today, it feels like it may be a bit more granular. Has the committee continued to raise expectations of quality of the information that we'll be hearing?
You have to remember, this is somewhat out of order to how they initially thought that this was going to be laid out, right? So if you're looking at this as a narrative arc over the course of a series of hearings, it is, as somebody, I think it was Playbook today, maybe talking about how it's like Star Wars, there's prequels at different points and we sort of dip in and out of the storyline, which I think feels like a fitting analogy. It will be more granular, Lester, and that for those, for example, Department of Justice reporters who have been in and out of every twist and turn on this will feel a little familiar. I'm not sure it's going to feel like that to a lot of people in the American public who are going to be watching this across many networks, who may, for the first time, right, be hearing about exactly what was happening in the machinations behind the scenes on this front. I also think, to the point about what we might hear, I wouldn't be surprised if there was at least some personal element here, because these are top Department of Justice officials who are facing what Danny talked about, unprecedented pressure like we have not seen, right? That the only, potential analogy we can even think about drawing is to the Saturday Night Massacre tells you how significant this was for them. And I think the committee has had an eye through this entire process. And I've spoken with members of the committee who talk about how they're trying to lay this out. They've had an eye in the process of how to make this relatable and how to make this connect to people who are watching. right? Because for them, this is about, in many ways, setting down an accurate record of history as they see it. And there's a lot of conversation about is it persuading the American public, et cetera. But I do think that there may be some of the emotional pieces. What was it like for Jeff Rose as he had to sit there faced by Donald Trump and tell him what you are doing is so wrong that I may leave? What was it like for these other witnesses who you're going to hear from? So I do think there may be some moments like that.
That's a baloney. We ended the last hearing on a little bit of a.
We might see
the
it.
last lawyer.
Yeah.
It felt like oh, I got to binge for the next episode. Like we were left with this cliffhanger. Liz Cheney saying, "If you hear me, Pat Cipollone, come testify." Correct me if I'm wrong, Hallie, but it sounds like we may see a vision of him today. I don't know if we meeting a tape deposition. I have a feeling, and that's going to be an interesting moment.
Potentially, right? The other piece that we think,
the hints we've been given.
we know that we feel very confident too. We're going to hear more about the conversations he was having because these witnesses were in those conversations with him. You know, we've talked about how Pat Cipollone, more than others, has this claim to executive privilege that others, for example, tied to the campaign, who didn't work at the White House, who didn't have that privilege with the president, cannot account for. And Danny, you can speak to that. But Jeff, I think you're right. He is, if as you say, Jeffrey Clark is kind of the specter of a character hanging over this who's not seen. Pat Cipollone is, I think, right up there too today.
Just noting that Sean Penn, in case you thought that's who you were looking at, that's Sean Penn in the gallery too. Let's go back to Garrett Hake, our senior Capitol Hill correspondent. Garrett, talk about the last-minute delay for future hearings and what that portends.
Yeah, Lester, up until a few days ago, we were expecting a full slate of hearings next week. The chairman has come out and said that due to an influx in new information, in new evidence since they started their hearings a couple weeks ago, they're going to delay now until potentially the middle of July. The final two hearings that we know they were planning, he's even left open the possibility there could be additional hearings beyond that. And so some of this is new evidence, and some of it is evidence they want to get. You were just discussing Pat Cipollone and the effort to get him and come and testify. That is a piece of evidence the committee is still seeking. But we do know that in recent days, they've gotten their hands on quite a lot of video from a documentarian by the name of Alex Holder. He's a British documentary filmmaker. He was embedded in the Trump White House and Trump campaign. You're seeing some of the video that he has released. And for deposition today, it was quite short, only about 2 hours. That tells me they want the video more than they want to talk to him. We don't know, frankly, exactly what he has, only that he's got interviews with Trump and Trump family members from before and after the events of January 6th, and the committee thinks it might shed new light, although I should add that Holder has missed no opportunity to promote his documentary, and so I think we're all waiting quite eagerly to see what, if any, new light this video sheds, but the committee believes it is significant.
Garrett, thank you. And the witnesses we've seen primarily at these hearings are Republican witnesses. We feel more damaging against the president as they continue to make a case. Some of these highly respected members of the Republican Party, Justice Department officials, talk about the pressure that they say they were under to go along with the president's scheme that, as you point out, ultimately did not carry through.
Look, I do think the Donahue testimony is going to be fascinating. The only thing I'm curious about here is whether we'll get a little disappointed in the last hearing. Felt like they leave some stuff out there, and you're like, wait, draw that out of him more. Tell us a little bit more here.
Does it have to do with the scripted nature of the questions?
It feels like it's a scripted set of answers at times. It's like they know what they want to get out of it, and you're like, well, finish that thought. I'd like to know where that went.
Some of it feels somewhat intentional. So, for example, we heard, and this goes back to something that I think we may possibly hear more about today. I referenced Republican Congressman Scott Perry, for example, who was somebody who was sympathetic to the former president's claims, lies about election fraud. That got dropped in an early hearing and then sort of went nowhere, that he had apparently asked for a pardon, the committee says, something that Perry's office denies. I wonder if today is receipts the committee
maybe more Perry, but I hear that pardon stuff's still another couple weeks away. And that, some of that is a reason for the delay. There's another reason for this delay. Next week could have the most consequential Supreme Court decision in 2 generations. I do think they want to steer clear of next week.
But at the same time, wouldn't they want the narrative to be cohesive?
Is there a political risk?
Well, I think it's sort of a combination. They are getting more information. I think you say we want to make sure each one of our hearings lives up to the same quality that we've delivered so far. But again, next week also comes with that, and they were very mindful of that. They wanted to be done before these hearings, and they haven't been able to do that. By the way, another reason this hearing got delayed is, I think, Pat's belonging. They've been trying, they were hoping, they bought more time, they were hoping they could somehow convince him to do this, and unless the surprise is coming, it doesn't look like that.
All right, well, the witnesses have entered the chambers there. We expect this session, this hearing to be gaveled in here shortly. The hearing's set to begin in just a moment. What we're going to do now is pause briefly. We're going to give our NBC stations across the country a chance to join our network special report coverage.
Whatever you need, do it for less at Harbor Freight.
This is an NBC News special report. The results of a year-long investigation into the January 6th attack. Day 5 of the unprecedented congressional hearings. Today, testimony from Justice Department officials whom President Trump tried to force out over his false election fraud claims.
He's become detached from reality, if he really believes this stuff.
On the Capitol.
President Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack.
New Week's committee makes its case to the American people. Here now is Lester Holt.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this NBC News special report. It's day 5 of the January 6th Select Committee hearings, and today the panel members will be focused on the following question. Did former President Trump pressure the nation's top law enforcement agency to help overturn the 2020 election? Under the microscope, the department.
Marking 100 days since the attack by Hamas on Israel that launched the war altogether. Israel's prime minister saying that Israel will continue its war against Hamas until the terrorist group is eliminated and will not be stopped by anyone. That includes the World Court. Netanyahu speaking after the International Court of Justice held 2 days of hearings on South Africa's allegations that Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians. The case before the World Court could go on for years, but a ruling on interim steps could come in weeks. Court rulings are considered legally binding, but are difficult to enforce overall, and Netanyahu does say Israel will ignore any orders that would halt that fighting. Mark Chandler is the Director of Government Relations at Coastal Carolina University and Professor of Practice, also a intelligence defense official, joining us now live to talk about the latest developments on the war itself. As always, Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. There are always so many developments, so we do appreciate you helping to break them down.
Good morning, Josh. You're quite welcome, and hopefully we can create some sort of understanding here.
Well, first off, I do want to talk about Netanyahu's comments that the war will continue despite whatever the World Court does decide. Is any of that surprising at this point? Because it seems that Netanyahu overall has been fairly, I don't know if you use the word defiant, but defiant.
No, I think that's a good word to use, Josh. I also think one we could say is steadfast. He is steadfast in the mission to protect Israel. Early on, they talk about the destruction of Hamas and Hamas's fighting capabilities and the ability to continue to attack Israel, which Hamas has done as recently as the last few days. So I don't see that as a surprise statement. Here is the fact that the South African charge even got its day in court, if you will, at the ICJ. So when we look at this genocide accusation by South Africa, they're trying to throw some history in there, use the fact that Israel was responding to an attack on its territory, a terrorist attack, killing 1,200 innocent people on October 7th. they're starting to say, okay, let's shift the narrative, if you will, the global narrative, and trying to use the ICJ for that. As you said, it is binding. 153 countries signed the agreement. The genocide of Israel is one of those. The United States is another. But we have to really look at the basis for this charge that South Africa has, and I don't think it has a lot of standing. We look at that. The United States even said this takes away from the key discussions of trying to resolve peace here and trying to take out the Hamas terrorists. So it's no real finding. It's a lot of noise. It's going to gain a lot of traction for the anti-Israeli arguments around the world, but really, I think Israel needs to press on here and not worry about what the ICJ is going to come out and say.
South Africa that did make this claim of genocide. Is that what you would expect from South Africa as opposed to some of the other countries across the world?
Well, it was slightly surprising that it came from there. However, Israel and South Africa don't have the best of relations. So I think you can go back and look at the underpinnings there and perhaps South Africa's motivation behind it. So it's not really that South Africa is so pro-Palestinian as they are more anti-Israeli. And since you don't really have to have a basis for filing at the ICJ, they can come up with these charges, make the accusations, and try to build a case around that. In addition to the fact that they are speaking and they have Palestinian advisors helping the South Africans create this charge at the ICJ.
And I know we bounce around a lot when we're talking about all these topics, but there is a lot to discuss. I want airstrikes by the U.S. and U.K. on the Houthis in Yemen. Is that what we would have expected here? Does it show any sort of escalation overall in the war itself and in what some say is a regional conflict?
Well, Josh, as I've talked about a couple of times on your program, I would say it's about time we did something. Now, these strikes conducted actually over 2 days in concert with the British. The British had some warplanes that they flew from Cyprus. We had F-18s off the Eisenhower carrier group, and then we launched some Tomahawk missiles. So it was a good show of force. However, the military value, what we need to really look at is we still have to conduct what we call battlefield damage assessment and see how successful the strikes are. But looking at the 16 different areas, about 60 specific targets, I don't think this destroyed any Houthi capability to launch continued attacks against shipping in the Red Sea. Degrade, yes, but we've already seen an attack with a missile again on Friday, I believe it was, the day following the overnight attacks against some shipping out there. So it degraded perhaps, but I do not think it destroyed at all. And what we really need militarily is several days of consistent strikes to take out the Houthi capability from production and then also from the launch sites. So you're going to continue to see more attacks. We also need to see the backer, Iran, pay some sort of price. There's an interdiction that needs on the shipment of these missile parts and advisors that work their way across a sea route, if you will, and some land routes. So unless you stop the supply chain, you're not going to really stop the Houthi capability. To address your escalation question, no, I don't think this is an escalation. You hear a lot of rhetoric coming from the Houthis, like Iraq, coming from Iran, and even Russia. But I don't think this incident is going to escalate. I think we need to actually send a stronger message to the Houthis to stop this, especially with the impact on world trade that's taking place.
We've also heard a few times from Israel saying that Hamas was planning terrorist attacks over in Europe. We know arrests have been made in several countries. What do you make of all of that? That is another developing situation that's not necessarily happening right there over in the Middle East, but actually elsewhere in the world.
Well, let me put your question in a little bit of context, if I can, and go back to the early days after Hamas attacked Israel. Hamas said that Jewish people, Israelis, and Americans are fair targets around the world. And so when we start to look at that idea and that attitude, yes, we're going to continue to see this. There are active cells in Europe, active Hamas cells. What we see is good for Mossad and Shin Bet, the Israeli intelligence services, to discover this plot. I believe it was against their embassy where this attack was scheduled. If we go back to mid-December, you'll recall that Germany and Denmark rolled up about 7 Hamas terrorists on an active plot at that time. So we can see that this is going to continue. Hamas has relationships with Hezbollah and Iran, who have their tentacles, if you will, stretched across Europe, and as much as I hate to say it, even the United States, to try to work some sort of terrorist cell and terrorist activity. So this is going to continue. We just have to ensure that our intelligence services are finely tuned to pick up these incidents, these planning cells that are scattered throughout the world. You're going to see more of this.
And I want to talk a little bit about a New York Times report that is saying that the CIA, according to officials there within the U.S., has created essentially a task force that is determined to locate those top Hamas officials. What does that say overall about the U.S. involvement here 100 days into the war?
Well, a couple of things here, Josh, and I've got to put on, my former defense intelligence hat here a little bit and be careful how we address this one. The New York Times, they release a lot of classified information and their sources they get, and that endangers some of our operatives around the world. I've seen this firsthand, so I want to be careful confirming or denying this, if you will. But I do know that when I was Defense Intelligence Agency's director of the Middle East and Africa Center, I had relationships with certain countries for intelligence sharing. Israel was one of those. They gave us valuable information on ISIS operations, critical information on militia groups, terrorist groups, and even Iran. So we do have those with certain allied countries. But what you're seeing, I believe, from this New York Times report is the fact that the CIA did establish a task force early on after the Hamas attacks to look for where the hostages were. Recall, we had and still have Americans held hostage by Hamas. So to locate and identify those and share that information. As a natural byproduct, we're starting to see the fact that since Hamas keeps these hostages close to them and close to the leadership to avoid attacks, a natural byproduct is perhaps the location of certain Hamas leadership. So this is a natural extension, but I don't want to endanger any potential operations that we may have.
And that's important to mention. We want to make sure that we're not endangering anyone. So I appreciate you kind of remaining as vague as possible there to prevent any sort of information from getting out that shouldn't there. As we mentioned at the top of the hour here, this is marking 100 days of the war since that attack by Hamas that killed 1,200 people over in Israel, possibly even more there. This is a loaded question and probably very difficult to answer, but how have things changed since that first day, October 7th, as all of this was developing, versus now here on January 14th, 100 days later?
Well, thanks, Josh, for appreciating the difficulty of the question. And you are right, it is difficult. This is a somber landmark to look at this. And I can say, let me, you and I would not be having this conversation had Hamas not brutally attacked Israel and killed 1,200 innocent people on October 7th. There would be no 100 days. We could stop this tomorrow if Hamas surrendered, gave up all the leadership and the terrorist fighters that conducted that attack and continue to conduct that attack. So with that as the backdrop, just realizing you and I wouldn't be talking today had that not happened. But when we look at how things changed, I think one of the biggest changes is the information, the global information campaign that the pro-Palestinians and Hamas and Iran and Hezbollah have come out so strong in really condemning the fact that Israel has been defending itself against Hamas. And I believe, and Israel needs to push this out, the United States needs to push it, Israel's allies need to push the fact of how terrible Hamas started this, but then how they continue to exacerbate this with no regard for human life. And I'm talking no regard not just for Israelis, but for Palestinian lives. And so when you look at how Hamas conducts this war and this information campaign, we need to keep that in perspective and balance our sources of information. If I were to go, right now we're facing some global consumer problems. And that stems from what the Houthis who I would dare say that a lot of people around the world didn't appreciate who the Houthis were and what they did, but now they've interrupted with their attacks in the Red Sea. And so we start to see that impact that's taking place. We start to see Hezbollah and how really we had peace in the Middle East before this attack. And now Hezbollah is pressing, and they conducted attacks late last night and early this morning in the northern part of Israel. And so we're starting to see this escalation that's occurring out there. And so when we start to look at this global perspective, I think the world has shifted out there. Let's look at, what's changed in the U.S. Middle East. The Middle East policy for the U.S. in this administration hasn't had the Middle East or Israel or Hamas in any kind of high priority. You've had Secretary Blinken take 4 trips to the Middle East. What do we have to show for it? We have very little to show for that because the U.S. has not been able to reestablish itself as an authority or as somebody who can speak with trust and confidence in the Middle East operations. So we're still trying to catch up and play as we're going forward. Who do I see as a victor in this? If there is one, Iran. When I start to look at this, the destabilizing effects that the proxies that Iran is using, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the militia in Iraq and Syria, Iran has created a destabilized effect that's affecting the globe now based on what it's doing in the Middle East. So our world is more unstable today than it was on 6 October based on what's happening. And I don't see a near end in sight to this fighting this day.
And what I'm showing right now is kind of going to what you were speaking about with Hezbollah, because this is actually a tweet that came in from the Israel War Room not too long ago with a photo saying that a Hezbollah rocket did hit.
Red Cross had not pressed to see and check on the safety and security of the hostages up to that point. So are they going to be successful? I would assess that several hostages died because the International Committee for the Red Cross failed in support of Israel in this case. And so hopefully that they can step up a little bit here and get that medication directly to those hostages who are in dire need of them at this time.
All right, Mark, my last question here before I let you go. What is holding up another ceasefire and hostage release deal at this moment? I know I keep saying, is there an answer to this question, but is there an answer to this question specifically?
Well, I would say directly holding this up is Hamas. As I said, kind of at that, or when we talk about the 100 days since this, Hamas can stop this today. They could stop this and just cease the fighting. We'll worry about post-governance after that. But Hamas refuses to give up. They continue to attack Israel. So when you look at Israel defending itself with these attacks into Gaza and defending itself against Hezbollah, you have to look at how this is going to play out. Israel has had several opportunities or several offers to stop the fighting. Hamas has backed away. They've come out with very unrealistic demands. So Secretary Blinken's trip this week tried to create some sort of talk and energy to re-energize these talks. Israel again approached and went to Cairo to try to create more discussions. We'll see if Hamas comes back and tries to have some sort of reasonable discussion and come up to terms. But right now, I've got to say that Hamas is being really entrenched in its position to not negotiate. And you're going to continue to see suffering of the Palestinians because Hamas refuses to do this. And Israel has to ensure its security. So unfortunately, as much as I would like to see peace break out, as much as I'd like to see the fighting stop, I don't think that's going to happen in the near future.
All right. Mark Chandler there with Coastal Carolina University. We always appreciate you joining us and helping to break down the latest information as there are so many developments. Is there anything else you want to add before I let you go?
Well, Josh, we touched on the International Court of Justice and the genocide claim, so I don't really want to go into that. We just have to kind of look at how this is going to progress as we get our attention focused out there. Escalation is going to have a lot of concerns for everybody, but we have to look at really who's behind the escalation. And it's not Israel, it's not the United States, it's not Britain, it's how Hamas, it's how Iran are kind of spreading this and keeping the fuels of this fire going. So we have to start to look at that and create some sort of deterrent effect as we move forward. So unfortunately, I don't see any resolution in the near term, and I hate to end on something like that today.
But I appreciate your honesty there. Thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to join us and help break it all down. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. To be busy.
I'm sure. You too.
So, an Israeli hostage mistakenly killed by soldiers in the Gaza Strip was buried on Sunday. 26-year-old Alon Shamres was one of 3 Israeli hostages shot dead by soldiers during an operation in the Shajaiya, even as they carried a white flag and cried for help in Hebrew. The Israeli army also released images showing banners hung by the 3 hostages mistakenly killed by Israeli troops with the writing, "Help 3 hostages" and SOS.
You escaped against all the chances and did everything to return home. So unfortunate, with all that you went through in those moments, you already saw the light, but it became darkness. Those who abandoned you also murdered you after you did everything right.
Palestinian Health Ministry stated Israeli forces killed 5 Palestinians on Sunday morning at a refugee camp in the West Bank. The Israeli military said airstrikes targeted militants who had endangered soldiers. According to the Palestinian ministry, more than 290 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces or settlers in the West Bank since the 7th of October. Paris condemned an Israeli bombardment in Gaza, which caused the death of one of its foreign ministry officials who had taken refuge in the Rafah home of a colleague. The ministry demanded Israeli authorities shed light on the circumstances of this bombardment as soon as possible. It did not give the name or nationality of the official who had worked for France since 2002. Pope Francis deplored the death of 2 women in a Catholic parish in Gaza, where he said defenseless civilians were targeted by shootings and bombings.
Unarmed civilians are being bombed and shot at. And this has even happened inside the Holy Family parish compound, where there are no terrorists with families, children and sick people with disabilities and nuns.
My Justice League will burn this earth down for me.
The head of the World Health Organization denounced the effective destruction of the Kamal Adwan hospital in the north of Gaza, adding that at least 8 patients had died. Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said that a 9-year-old child was among the deceased patients.
Elon Levy is the spokesperson for the Israeli government. He's now joining us live from Tel Aviv. Sir, it's good to see you and thank you for making time for us. Mr. Levy, we have seen some heartbreaking images coming from the Rafah border crossing of residents scrambling for aid. The United Nations also says that hunger levels have grown across the Gaza Strip amid Israeli attacks. The Israeli government did promise that they will provide some sort of relief to Gazans. What happened to that? Why is this level of desperation hiking or rising?
What we're seeing, unfortunately, is a shameful attempt by international officials to deflect blame onto Israel to cover up the fact that they have been covering up for Hamas. Israel has, since the beginning of this war, placed no restrictions whatsoever on humanitarian necessities going into Gaza. We want to see as much food, water, medicine, and shelter reach the people of Gaza. The problem is there's a backlog at the Rafah crossing, and the problem is that UN agencies aren't able to distribute the aid at the pace that Israel is inspecting it. We have the capacity to more than double the entry of aid into the Gaza Strip, but the UN agencies on the ground aren't able to distribute it enough. And on top of all of that, we know that Hamas has been stealing aid, and I'm sure that you've been covering those images as well of Hamas gunmen hijacking aid trucks. And unfortunately, all the UN agencies that are feigning concern for civilians in Gaza, the World Health Organization, the Red Cross, UNICEF, UNRWA, none of them have a single word of criticism for Hamas stealing aid from the desperate civilians in Gaza who need it. And we think it's about time that international agencies point the finger very clearly at the source of this crisis, and that is Hamas, the terror organization that launched this war with the October 7th massacre and is doing its best to manufacture a humanitarian crisis because it wants to generate sympathy, to generate diplomatic pressure, to get Israel to stop defending itself, and so Hamas can be let off and get off the hook for the October 7th massacre.
All right, let's talk about another matter at hand. There are calls for Israel to return to a negotiation table and discuss the hostage situation, come up with a workable solution for the hostages' sake. But the Israeli government is not willing to compromise. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that a possible talk is imminent with Qatar, but the international community, in fact, says you are the problem. Why is that?
No. Let's put some things in order. On October 7th, Hamas brutally abducted 250 of our people. And we have been doing everything possible since in order to bring them home to safety. That is a central goal of this war, to bring back the hostages and to destroy the terror organization that took them hostage. In order to do that, we have been putting unrelenting military pressure on Hamas. It was that military pressure that brought Hamas to agree to the last pause in the fighting. We wanted hostages back, they wanted a pause in the fighting, so in exchange for releasing hostages, they got a few days of a breather. But then Hamas, which started this war on October 7th, restarted this war on December 1st, when it decided to terminate the hostage release pause and rockets at Israel instead of giving us back all the women and children. We're putting more military pressure now on Hamas because that is the only thing that brings Hamas to a position where it is willing to talk and willing to negotiate to give up hostages in the first place. So really the narrative that we're seeing in some places in the world, as if Israel needs convincing or Israel needs pressure put on it in order to do everything possible to get our hostages back, is a complete distortion of reality. Israel is the only international actor right now lifting as much as a finger to try to get the hostages back, while the Red Cross is not visiting them. The Red Cross is not putting on enough diplomatic pressure in order to visit the hostages. And countries around the world are trying to call on Israel to stop the fighting instead of ramping up the military pressure to get back the 129 people who are still trapped in the Gaza Strip and whose families desperately want them back safe and sound.
Okay. 2 days ago, the IDF confirmed that they had mistakenly killed hostages in Gaza. Is there any sort of action that will be taken against the persons who committed the act? Or rather, what's the Israeli government doing about that? What are you telling the families?
This was a horrific tragedy and a terrible mistake. And I can tell you that everyone, when they heard the news, was stunned into silence because something like this should not happen. We've gone into the Gaza Strip to try to get our hostages out. And the fact that some of them were killed by our forces is horrific. Now our forces are acting in very difficult circumstances. They are fighting Hamas in door-to-door fighting in a dense urban area where Hamas is constantly trying to lure them into ambushes. We've had Hamas playing recordings of voices in Hebrew and putting out booby-trapped dolls and children's bags to try to lure our forces in, to try to confuse them, to try to do everything possible to put our civilians and the hostages in harm's way. And it's important to remember that ultimately for that horrific incident, it is Hamas that bears responsibility for the fact that those hostages are in danger in Gaza in the first place. And we are immediately learning lessons so that a horrific tragedy like this can never happen again, as we fight to bring back all 129 of the remaining hostages and to bring to justice the brutal army of terror that abducted them and has been holding them in inhumane conditions in terror dungeons ever since.
All right, I've been talking to the spokesperson for the Israeli government, Elon Levy. As always, thank you.
Thank you.
Our top story right now is the Israel-Hamas war developments that have come in. The war has flattened large parts of North Gaza and killed over 18,000 and driven most of the population to the southern part of the besieged territory. Now, some 1.9 million Palestinians, nearly 85% of Gaza's population, have fled. The Israeli army said that it had uncovered the biggest Hamas tunnel in the Gaza Strip so far, and the army also said that the underground passage formed part of a wider branching network that stretched for more than 4 kilometers and came within 1,300 feet of the area's border crossing.
So far, we have uncovered more than 4 kilometers of the tunnel's web. This is a flagship project of Hamas. It reaches a depth of 50 meters below the surface of the earth. Inside the tunnels, we found many weapons. This is no ordinary tunnel. It is a city of terror underground that Hamas dug and built instead of investing money in the residents of Gaza.
The Israeli forces also released a video of Mohammed Sinwar, the right-hand man and brother of Gaza chief Yahya Sinwar, being driven in a car through the massive tunnel. Now, in a silent video, Sinwar can be seen giving instructions to the driver as they travel through the tunnel at a significant speed in a fairly modern-looking vehicle. The Syrian Defense Ministry said Israeli airstrikes against targets near Damascus wounded 2 Syrian soldiers on Sunday. A UK-based war monitor said Israeli aircraft struck Syrian regime anti-aircraft defenses and positions of Hezbollah near Saida Zainab district south of the capital. An Israeli hostage, mistakenly killed by soldiers in the Gaza Strip, was buried on Sunday. The 26-year-old Alan Shamris was one of 3 Israeli hostages who were shot dead by soldiers during an operation in Shijaya. And even as they carried a white flag and cried for help in Hebrew. An Israeli hostage abducted by Hamas on October 7th from the Supernova Music Festival has been confirmed dead. The hostages and missing persons families forum said that Inbar Haman was murdered at some point after she was kidnapped from the desert rave. Now, the Israeli army also released images showing banners hung by the 3 hostages mistakenly killed by Israeli troops with the writing, "Help, 3 hostages," and SOS.
You escaped against all its moments. You already saw the light, but it became darkness. Those who abandoned you also murdered you after you did everything right.
Palestinian Health Ministry stated that Israeli forces killed 5 Palestinians Sunday morning at a refugee camp in the West Bank. The Israeli military said airstrikes targeted militants who had endangered soldiers. And according to the Palestinian ministry, more than 2 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces or settlers in the West Bank since October 7th. Now, Paris condemned an Israeli bombardment in Gaza, which caused the death of one of its foreign ministry officials who had taken refuge in the Rafah home of a colleague. The ministry demanded Israeli authorities shed light on the circumstances of this bombardment as soon as possible. Now, it did not give the name or nationality of the official who had worked for France since 2002. Pope Francis deplored the death of 2 women in a Catholic parish in Gaza, where he said defenseless civilians were targeted by shootings and bombings.
Unarmed civilians are being bombed and shot at. And this has even happened inside the Holy Family Parish compound, where there are children and sick people with disabilities and nuns.
The head of the World Health Organization denounced the effective destruction of the hospital in north of Gaza, adding that at least 8 patients had died. Tedros Adhanom said a 9-year-old child was among the deceased patients.
Peanut butter and bacon may seem crazy to you, but this is just smooth peanut butter and crispy bacon asking a double cheeseburger with melty cheese and a shake to love them. It's peanut butter bacon time at Sonic.
Now, for more on this, we have with us Chori. Go ahead. Chori, what can you tell us about the reports that a new hostage release deal and accompanying humanitarian pause in the fighting could be on the table?
Hi, Aditi. Yes, so over the weekend, there was a big rally in Tel Aviv, and people were calling there for the government to really prioritize trying to secure a hostage release deal for the more than 130 Israeli hostages that are still being kept in Gaza. Now, that was after the Israel Defense Forces mistakenly shot 3 of the hostages in Gaza, and the IDF said that Hamas has been setting traps for its soldiers, including using Hebrew and shooting at soldiers after appearing to surrender. Now, Minister Gantz has said that the top priority for the government is to try and secure the return of the remaining hostages, and that the second priority is to battle Hamas. But we do know that Israel believes that military pressure is the best way to secure that hostage deal. But according to Egyptian security sources who've spoken to Reuters, they say that Israel and Hamas are both open to a new deal. Hamas's precondition is for more aid to be allowed into Gaza, and Israel has opened the Kerem Shalom crossing between Israel and Gaza for more aid. But the Israeli spokesperson has repeatedly said that Israel is inspecting enough aid and that the bottleneck is with international agencies not getting the aid in, and also Hamas stealing for its fighters. And in the latest Israeli media is showing a video which reportedly shows Hamas stealing aid trucks. In the meantime, we know that Mossad head David Barnea is going to be meeting with Qatar's Prime Minister for more talks on a potential new hostage deal, but it is expected to take time.
And Jody, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is going to be visiting Israel later on Monday, today, at around the same time as another UN Security Council resolution is likely to be voted on, calling for a ceasefire, vetoed on, to be calling for a ceasefire. Now, do you think that U.S. will use its veto again?
So there have been growing calls for a ceasefire. Hamas says that more than 18,000 Gazans have been killed. Israel says that number includes more terrorists, that they target Hamas and not civilians, but that Hamas hides behind civilians, using them as human shields, including using ambulances for cover. And they say that they found weapons in baby incubators in hospitals. Israel set up 150 shelters, we know, and has reduced active NAP to try and help civilians avoid the fighting. And White House spokesperson John Kirby has said that Israel's done possibly more than the US would have done to give advance warning of its strikes. The US, as you said, used its veto at the last UN Security Council resolution vote, which was calling for a ceasefire, and we've got another vote that's going to take place later on today. Whether or not the US will use its veto will really depend on the language. Israel and the United States has said that a ceasefire would keep Hamas in power, and the US wants to see the language amended on the cessation of hostilities. Meanwhile, as you said, US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is going to be in Israel later on Monday. No doubt they're going to be discussing this, also the timetable of the war, protecting civilians, and also reportedly a new maritime protection force that is said to be being set up after attacks on shipping by the Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen.
Israel is facing immense pressure from its citizens to bring hostage negotiations back to the table. Anger and sorrow have been mounting in Israel after the IDF admitted to killing 3 hostages on Friday. Hostages were earlier freed during a week-long truce-spoken enjoyment of the protests or rallies, and pressured Israeli authorities to ramp up efforts in bringing back the remaining hostages.
התחננתי בפני הקבינט, וכולנו הזהרנו שלחימה עלולה לגרום לפגיעה בחטופים. לצערי צדקתי. אני ניצלתי. אפילו מתווה לשחרור החטופים היה נדחה בשבוע. אולי לא הייתי פה.
Thousands have gathered outside Israel's defense headquarters in Tel Aviv to protest the Israel military's action and call on the government to do more to release the hostages from Gaza. Protests and rallies rocked Tel Aviv. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has confirmed that a fresh round of hostage negotiations with Qatar's mediation is currently underway. This even has been saying Israel will fight to the end. But the Israeli leader did not confirm reports of a meeting between Mossad head David Bangla and Qatari Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Al Thani.
אנחנו פועלים גם עם קטר וגם עם מצרים. יש לנו ביקורת קשה בקטר. קטר עוד אני תושמד, אבל כרגע אנחנו מנסים להשלים את המהלך של שחרור חטופינו.
However, Hamas has asserted its position that the group will not come to the negotiation table until Israel stops bombarding in Gaza. A statement by the militant group revealed that its official position has been conveyed to all mediators. As domestic pressure in Israel escalates, there has also been a flurry of action on the diplomatic front. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is currently on a trip to West Asia. The trip, which begins in Israel, will also involve a visit to Qatar and Bahrain. Potential talks around the hostage situation, escalating death toll in Gaza, and rising maritime tensions in the Red Sea will be high on Lloyd's agenda. Meanwhile, the battleground in Gaza continues to remain tense and volatile. Israeli forces carried out a fresh wave of airstrikes on a UNRWA school in Khan Yunis. The victims were rushed to the nearby Nasser hospital for urgent medical care.
אני לא בסבור מדע סבינה, בגלל מה في الشمال. وإنما أنا خاف أنا بقول لك في الشمال. مش منطقة آمنة.
Close to 19,000 Gazans have been killed since October 7th by Israeli airstrikes and ground offensive. 90% of Gaza's population has also been rendered homeless as Gaza continues to reel under a dire humanitarian crisis. The Kerem Shalom crossing between Israel and Gaza has now been opened to allow aid trucks into the enclave. Meanwhile, thousands of Gazans scrambled for food at the Rafah crossing. Till Saturday, Rafah border was the only entry point for aid trucks. Time and again, the United Nations has raised concerns that the quantum of supplies trickling into Gaza being equal to a drop in the ocean. Since the siege of Gaza, over 2.3 million Palestinians are battling hunger and homelessness. On the other hand, in the West Bank, tensions continue to escalate as Israeli military carries out raids in the region. According to reports by Palestinian Red Crescent Society, Israeli soldiers were seen blocking ambulances. An injured person is believed to have died in the Nur Shams camp after the ambulances were prevented from entering the area despite coordination through the Red Cross.
At the moment, Israeli military is considering plans to invade southern Lebanon, and this while risking further escalation in the ongoing conflict with Hamas. And despite calls for restraint from Western allies, Israel Defense Forces are planning to push Hezbollah forces north to the symbolic Litani River. Now, the river holds a significance due to a UN ceasefire resolution in 2006. The resolution required the removal of armed forces in Lebanon, which is north of the river. However, Hezbollah has still fortified the area, and they have justified this by claiming Israel's non-withdrawal from a disputed area in the Golan Heights. Now, the two sides have been exchanging artillery and missile fire since the start of the war in Gaza, and it has also raised concerns about the conflict spreading further. And these concerns have been lowered by Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. He indicated a major offensive would only occur if provoked by Israel. Hamas-based and overwhelming victory. On the other hand, IDF spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan has emphasized that there is no returning to the existing state of affairs. This as the forces are already prepared and plans for their readiness have been defined. Now, Israeli politicians and military strategists also rejected an easy ceasefire with Hezbollah, and this has prompted a discussion within Israel's war cabinet on whether to launch a ground force or not, a decision which can prove to be very crucial for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Meanwhile, there is an ongoing internal debate within the war cabinet on how seriously to take this Hezbollah threat. While some believe that Hezbollah fears a political backlash in Lebanon, the IDF sees potential for militant attacks in northern Israel.
Well then, let's take a look at our top story. Israeli military is considering plans to invade southern Lebanon. This while risking further escalation in the ongoing conflict with Hamas. Now, despite calls for restraint from Western allies, the Israel Defense Forces are planning to push Hezbollah to the symbolic Litani River. The Litani River holds significance due to a UN ceasefire resolution in 2006. The resolution required the removal of armed forces in Lebanon north of the river. However, Hezbollah has still occupied the area. They have justified this by claiming Israel to withdraw from a disputed area in the Golan Heights. The two sides have been exchanging artillery and missile fire since the start of the war in Gaza. This has also raised concerns about the conflict spreading further. But these concerns have been lowered by Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. He indicated a major offensive would only occur if provoked by Israel, or if Hamas faced an overwhelming defeat. On the other hand, the IDF spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, has emphasized that there is no returning to the existing state of affairs. This as their forces are already prepared and plans for the readiness have been defined. Moreover, Israeli politicians and military strategists also rejected an easy ceasefire with Hezbollah. Now, this has prompted a discussion within Israel's war cabinet on whether to launch a ground force or not, a decision which can prove to be crucial for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Meanwhile, there is an ongoing internal debate within the war cabinet on how seriously to take this Hezbollah threat. While some believe Hezbollah fears a political backlash in Lebanon, the IDF sees potential for limited attacks in northern Israel.
Israel is facing immense pressure from its citizens to bring hostage negotiations back to the table. Anger and sorrow have been mounted in Israel after the IDF admitted to killing 3 hostages on Friday. Thousands gathered outside Israel's defense headquarters in Tel Aviv to protest the Israel military's action and call on the Netanyahu government to do more to release the hostages from Gaza. Hostages who were earlier freed during a week-long truce also joined the rallies and pressured Israeli authorities to ramp up efforts to bring back the remaining hostages.
לפני 10 ימים הגעתי לפגישה עם חברי הקבינט, התחננתי בפני הקבינט, וכולנו לזכור שלחימה עלולה לגרום לפגיעה בחטופים. לצערי צדקתי. אני ניצלתי. לכן המתווה לשחרור החטופים היה נדחה בשבוע. אולי לא הייתי פה.
While protests and rallies rock Tel Aviv, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has confirmed that a fresh round of hostage negotiations with Qatar's mediation is currently underway. This is as he said Israel will fight to the end. However, the Israeli leader did not confirm reports of a meeting between Mossad head David Barnea, Qatari Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani. القطار بتعمل الصايم باسم لغة كشاف القطار أو إسماعيل أو الدرجة من يشيل عشرين كمالات الشكوك. However, Hamas has asserted its position that the group will not come to the negotiation table until Israel stops bombarding Gaza. A statement by the military group has been conveyed to all mediators. As domestic pressure in Israel escalates, this will be a fiery reduction on the diplomatic front. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is currently on a trip to West Asia. The trip, which begins in Israel, will also involve a visit to Qatar and Bahrain. Essential talks around the hostage situation escalated death toll in Gaza. Maritime tensions in the Red Sea will be high on London's agenda. At the same time, the battleground in Gaza continues to remain tense and volatile. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, close to 19,000 Gazans have been killed by Israeli airstrikes and ground attacks, and 90% of Gaza's population has also been rendered homeless. West Bank as well. Tensions continue to escalate as Israeli military carries out raids in the region. According to reports by Palestinian Red Crescent Society, Israeli soldiers were seen blocking ambulances. A range of persons believed to have died in the Nul Shams camp after the ambulances were prevented from coordination through the Red Cross. The ally spoke to Imam Nebi, the spokesperson for the Israeli government, and this is what he had to say.
What we're seeing, unfortunately, is a shameful attempt by international officials to deflect blame onto Israel to cover up the fact that Israel has, since the beginning of this war, placed no restrictions whatsoever on humanitarian necessities going into Gaza. We want to see as much food, water, medicine, and shelter as yes. The problem is there's a backlog at the Rafah station. And the problem is that the UN agencies aren't able to distribute the aid at the pace that Israel is inspecting it. We have the capacity to more than double the entry of aid into the Gaza Strip, but the UN agencies on the ground can't distribute it quickly enough. And on top of all of that, we know that Hamas has been stealing aid, and I'm sure that you've been covering those images as well of Hamas gunmen hijacking aid trucks. And unfortunately, all the UN agencies that are feigning concern for civilians in Gaza, the World Health Organization, the Red Cross, UNICEF, UNRWA, none of them have a single word of criticism for Hamas stealing aid from the desperate civilians in Gaza who need it. And we think it's about time that international agencies point the finger very clearly at the source of this crisis, and that is Hamas, the terror organization that launched this war, the October 7th massacre, and is doing its best to manufacture a humanitarian crisis because it wants to generate sympathy, to generate diplomatic pressure, to get Israel to stop defending itself, and so Hamas can be let off and get off the hook for the October 7th massacre.
Shifting focus now, as Israel's offensive continues in Gaza, the cost of war is increasing in terms of lives being lost, families being destroyed, and an entire generation of children suffering endlessly. Out of the 18,800 people killed in Gaza so far, 70% of them have been women and children. Reality for children in Gaza has turned grim. From searching for toys and food through rubble, they continue to live under the terror of impending death.
واحنا نايمين في نص الليل اجت طائرات كسرت المكان. هنا صار زلزال في المنطقه، مش معروف ايش صار. طلع كيف الدمار، حجم الدمار هنا، بيوت كثير راحت. يعني طلع كيف هناك ايش زنقوا الناس، هاي زنق لطورنا يصير فينا هيك.
Children in southern Gaza could be seen looking for their belongings through the rubble after an Israeli strike damaged their home severely. A young boy says that home held nice memories. This is a story that has become far too common in Gaza, and with rubble, dust, and destruction, Gazans continue to search for hope.
طيب كم بيقولنا كانت ذكرياتنا هنا، كل شيء هنا عندنا، حاجاتنا الحلوة هنا، بسكريتات، كل شيء، أواعي، كل شيء لنا هنا. يعني كنا ننام ونشرب وناكل هنا، فجأة كل شيء دمر. فيش ليش في المكان ضايع، زي ما انت بتشوف ولا حاجه ضايعه ولا حجر على الثاني.
Shelling has continued across northern and southern Gaza, despite international leaders calling for a ceasefire. Israel says it will not months. Top officials say the war could last several months. So the question remains, how long will innocent children continue to pay the price of a collective punishment inflicted by Israel? And what future could Gaza's children possibly have left?
Now we've seen the ripple effect of the Israel-Hamas war beyond its borders, and now there is the threat of a larger maritime war as well. Shivam has all the details. Over to you, Shivam.
Thanks, Abe. Again, these are concerns which have been mounting ever since the war started, but now it seems that the fears are mounting even further. Now, the Israel-Hamas war has caused violence across different regions in West Asia. But now, maritime warfare have mounted. Now, this comes as Yemen's rebel group Houthis are attacking cargo vessels one after another that are en route to Israel through the southern Red Sea. Now, the threat to shipping companies is further escalating tensions in the region. Today, I'll decode the heightened regional tensions playing out on a new maritime front. You see, the Red Sea shipping route is one of the busiest in the world. That is what makes it so difficult. There are thousands of ships transiting through this stretch of water, and that happens every day. This map that we'll show you on the screen very shortly, this will give you an idea of the kind of maritime traffic that I am talking about. So this is essentially the Red Sea that you had on the map right in front. Now, the Red Sea is a vital economic artery and is likely to become more so in the coming decades. As a result of the large oil reserves throughout the region and precious metal resources, this makes the route critical for the global energy security. More than 10% of global trade passes through the Red Sea each year. Most ships sailing from Europe to Asia take this route as it is a crossing two of the 10 most strategic waterways in the world. The Bab al Mandeb at the sea's southern entrance and Egypt's Suez Canal is the north. Right there, Suez Canal, and the other point in the south. This is essentially the route that the ships need to take. But with the latest threat coming from the Houthi rebels from Yemen, the world's largest shipping group, Mediterranean Shipping Company (MSC), has announced that it is diverting its ships away from the Red Sea. The French company CMA-CGM took a similar step a day after Danish shipping giant Maersk and German transport company Hapag-Lloyd suspended Red Sea journeys. The four companies that have now suspended operations in the area comprise four of the top five in the world. Shipping experts say that the decisions are going to be very costly, and here is why. Next up, to give you a map, and this is the new route on which the vessels will have to take. It will not just go through the Red Sea, they will in fact have to go all the way across Africa to reach Israel. You can imagine how short this is and how long this is going to be and how much of an impact that will have. Container ships bound for Israel from the Far East or even India will now need to take a 40% longer route around Africa and the Cape of Good Hope. All of the ships will be rerouted of Africa, increasing the shipping time of goods by 2 to 4 weeks, and of course raising costs per ship by up to $1 million. Now, the additional costs will make goods more expensive, no doubt, and it will become more expensive for importers and trickle down to higher costs for the end consumers as well. So this is going to impact everyone, even ships going from India, one of which was recently attacked as well. These ships will now need to go through the Cape of Good Hope all the way across Africa to make it possible. Now that is as ships sailing for Israel since the war erupted already have higher freight costs, need to pay an additional war risk premium levied by marine insurers. For Israel, this is a major concern, as air freight is not an option. Since 99% of goods are imported by the sea and trade with Asia has soared, and around 40% of the cargo arriving in Israel passes through the Suez Canal. So Now, this is going to be a major concern, and it will impact not just Israel, it will impact all shipping countries. Goods prices will be going up, and of course, the end consumer will also be impacted. But yes, back to you.
Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story this hour. The Israel-Hamas war has flattened large parts of North Gaza, killed over 18,000, and driven most of the population to the southern part of the besieged territory. Some 1.9 million Palestinians, nearly 85% of Gaza's population, have fled their homes. The Israeli army said it had uncovered the biggest Hamas tunnel in the Gaza Strip so far. The army said the underground passage formed part of a wider branching network that stretched for more than 4 kilometers and came within 1,300 feet of the area's border crossing.
So far, we have uncovered more than 4 kilometers of the tunnel as well. This is a flagship project of Mars. It reaches a depth of 50 meters below the surface of the Earth. Inside the tunnels, we found many weapons. This is no ordinary tunnel. It is a city of terror underground that Hamas dug and built instead of investing money in the residents of Gaza.
Israeli forces also released a video of Mohammed Sinwar, the right-hand man of Brother of Gaza chief Yahya Sinwar, being driven in a car through the massive tunnel. In the silent video, Sinwar can be seen giving instructions to the driver as they travel through the tunnel at a significant speed in a fairly modern-looking vehicle. The Syrian Defense Ministry said Israeli airstrikes against targets near Damascus wounded 2 Syrian soldiers on Sunday. A UK-based war monitor said that Israeli aircraft struck Syrian regime anti-aircraft defenses and positions of Hezbollah near the Sayyida Zinab district south of the capital. An Israeli hostage mistaken by soldiers in the Gaza Strip was buried on Sunday. 26-year-old Shamriz was one of 3 Israeli hostages shot dead by soldiers during an operation in the Shijaiya, even as they carried a white flag and cried for help in Hebrew. The Israeli army also released images showing banners hung by the 3 hostages mistakenly killed by Israeli troops with the writing "Help 3 hostages" and SOS.
You escaped against all the chances and did everything to return. So unfortunate with all that you went through in those moments. You already saw the light, but it became darkness. Those who abandoned you also murdered you after you did everything right.
Palestinian Health Ministry stated Israeli forces killed 5 Palestinians on Sunday morning at a refugee camp in the West Bank. Israeli military said airstrikes targeted militants who had endangered soldiers. According to the Palestinian ministry, more than 290 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces or settlers in the West Bank since the 7th of October. Paris condemned an Israeli bombardment in Gaza, which caused the death of one of its foreign ministry officials who had taken refuge in the Rafah home of a colleague. The ministry demanded Israeli authorities shed light on the circumstances of this bombardment as soon as possible. It did not give the name or nationality of the official who had worked for France since 2002. Pope Francis deplored the death of 2 women in a Catholic parish in Gaza, where he said defenseless civilians were targeted by shootings and bombings.
unarmed civilians are being bombed and shot at. And this has even happened inside the ruling family parish compound, where there are no terrorists but families, children and sick people with disabilities and nuns.
The head of the World Health Organization denounced the effective destruction of the Kamal Adwan hospital in the north of Gaza, adding that at least 8 patients have died. Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said that a 9-year-old child was among the deceased patients.
Elon Levy is the spokesperson for the Israeli government is now joining us live from Tel Aviv. Sir, it's good to see you and thank you for making time for us. Mr. Levy, we have seen some heartbreaking images coming from the Rafah border crossing of residents scrambling for aid. The United Nations also says that hunger levels have grown across the Gaza Strip amid the Israeli attacks. The Israeli government did promise that they will provide some sort of relief to Gazans. What happened to that? Why is this level of desperation hiking or rising?
What we're seeing, unfortunately, is a shameful attempt by international officials to deflect blame onto to cover up the fact that they have been covering up for Hamas. Israel has, since the beginning of this war, placed no restrictions whatsoever on humanitarian necessities going into Gaza. We want to see as much food, water, medicine, and shelter reach the people of Gaza. The problem is there's a backlog at the Rafah crossing, and the problem is that UN agencies aren't able to distribute the aid at the pace that Israel is inspecting it. We have the capacity to more than double the entry of aid into the Gaza Strip, but the UN agencies on the ground aren't able to distribute it quickly enough. And on top of all of that, we know that Hamas has been stealing aid, and I'm sure that you've been covering those images as well of Hamas gunmen hijacking aid trucks. And unfortunately, all the UN agencies that are feigning concern for civilians in Gaza, the World Health Organization, the Red Cross, UNICEF, UNRWA, none of them have a single word of criticism for Hamas stealing aid from the desperate civilians in Gaza who need it. And we think it's about time that international agencies point the finger very clearly at the source of this crisis, and that is Hamas, the terror organization that launched this war of the October 7th massacre and is doing its best to fracture a humanitarian crisis because it wants to generate sympathy, to generate diplomatic pressure, to get Israel to stop defending itself, and so Hamas can be let off and get off the hook for the October 7th massacre.
All right, let's talk about another matter at hand. There are calls for Israel to return to the negotiation table and discuss a hostage situation. The Israeli government is not willing to compromise. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that a possible talk is imminent with Qatar. But the international community, in fact, says you are the problem. Why is that?
Let's put some things in perspective. On October 7th, Hamas abducted 250 of our people. And we have been doing everything possible since in order to bring them home to safety. That is a central goal of this war, to bring back the hostages and to destroy the terror organization that took them hostage. In order to do that, we have been putting unrelenting military pressure on Hamas. It was that military pressure that brought Hamas to agree to the last pause in the fighting. We wanted hostages back, they wanted a pause in the fighting, so in exchange for releasing hostages, they got a few days of a breather. But then Hamas, which started this war on October 7th, restarted this war on December 1st, when it decided to terminate the hostage release clause and start shooting rockets at Israel instead of giving us back all the women and children. We're putting more military pressure on Hamas because that is the only thing that brings Hamas to a position where it is willing to talk and willing to negotiate to give up hostages in the first place. So really the narrative that we're seeing in some places in the world is convincing, or Israel needs pressure put on it in order to do everything possible to get our hostages back, is a complete distortion of reality. Israel is the only international actor right now lifting as much as a finger to try to get the hostages back, while the Red Cross is not visiting them. The Red Cross is not putting on enough diplomatic pressure in order to visit the hostages. And countries around the world are trying to call on Israel to stop the fighting instead of ramping up the military pressure to get back the 129 people who are still trapped in the Gaza Strip and whose families desperately want them back safe and sound.
Okay. 2 days ago, the IDF confirmed that they had mistakenly killed hostages in Gaza. Is there any sort of action that will be taken against the persons who committed the act? Or rather, what's the Israeli government doing about that? What are you telling the families?
This was a horrific, horrific tragedy and a terrible mistake. And I can tell you that everyone, when they heard the news, was stunned into silence because something like this should not happen. We've gone into the Gaza Strip to try to get our hostages out. And the fact that some of them could have been killed by our forces is horrific. Now, our forces are acting in very... They are fighting Hamas in door-to-door fighting in a dense urban area where Hamas is constantly trying to lure them into ambushes. We've had Hamas playing recordings of voices in Hebrew and putting out booby-trapped dolls in children's bags to try to lure our forces in, to try to confuse them, to try to do everything possible to put our civilians and the hostages in harm's way. And it's important to remember that horrific incident, it is Hamas that bears responsibility for the fact that those hostages are in danger in Gaza in the first place. And we are immediately learning lessons so that a horrific tragedy like this can never happen again, as we fight to bring back all 129 of the remaining hostages and to bring to justice the brutal army of terror that abducted them and has been holding them in inhumane conditions in the Hamas terror dungeons ever since.
All right, I've been talking to these. As always, thank you.
Thank you.
Our top story right now is the Israel-Hamas war developments that are coming. The war has flattened large parts of North Gaza and killed over 18,000 and driven most of the population to the southern part of the besieged territory. Now, some 1.9 million Palestinians, nearly 85% of Gaza's population, have fled their homes. The Israeli army said that it had uncovered the biggest Hamas tunnel in the Gaza Strip so far, and the army also said that the underground passage formed part of a wider branching network that stretched for more than 4 kilometers and came within 1,300 feet of the nearest border crossing.
So far, we have uncovered more than 4 kilometers of the tunnel's web. This is a flagship project of Hamas. It reaches a depth of 50 meters below the surface of the earth. Inside the tunnel, we found many weapons. This is no ordinary tunnel. It is a city of terror underground that Hamas dug and built instead of investing money in the residents of Gaza.
The Israeli forces also released a video of Mohammed Sinwar, the right-hand man and brother of Gaza chief Yahya Sinwar, being driven in a car through the massive tunnel. Now, in a silent video, Sinwar can be seen giving instructions to the driver as they travel through the tunnel at a significant speed in a fairly modern-looking vehicle. The Syrian Defense Ministry said Israeli airstrikes against targets wounded 2 Syrian soldiers on Sunday. A UK-based war monitor said Israeli aircraft struck Syrian regime anti-aircraft defenses and positions of Hezbollah in Saida Zainab district south of the capital. An Israeli hostage, mistakenly killed by soldiers in the Gaza Strip, was buried on Sunday. The 26-year-old Alan Chamris was one of 3 Israeli hostages who were shot dead by soldiers during an operation in Shijaya. And even as they carried a white flag, and cried for help in Hebrew. An Israeli hostage abducted by Hamas on October Nova Music Festival has been confirmed dead. The hostages and missing persons families forum said that Inbar Haman was murdered at some point after she was kidnapped from the desert rain. Now, the Israeli army also released images showing banners hung by the three hostages mistakenly killed by Israeli troops with the writing, "Help, three hostages," and SOS.
You escaped against all the chances and did everything to return home. So unfortunate with all that you went through in those moments. You already saw the light, but it became darkness. Those who abandoned you also murdered you after you did everything right.
Palestinian ministry stated that Israeli forces killed 5 Palestinians Sunday morning at a refugee camp in the West Bank. The Israeli military said airstrikes targeted militants who had endangered soldiers. And according to the ministry, more than 290 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces or settlers in the West Bank since October 7th. Now, Paris condemned an Israeli bombardment in Gaza, which caused the death of one of its foreign ministry officials who had taken refuge in the Rafah home of a colleague. The ministry demanded Israeli authorities shed light on the circumstances of this bombardment as soon as possible. Now, it did not give the name or nationality of the official who had worked for France since 2002. Pope Francis deplored the death of 2 women in a Catholic parish in Gaza, where he said defenseless civilians were targeted by shootings and bombings.
Unarmed civilians are being bombed and shot at. And this has even happened inside the Holy Family Parish compound, where there are no terrorists but families, children and sick people with disabilities and nuns.
The head of the World Health Organization denounced the effective destruction of the hospital in north of Gaza, adding that at least 8 patients had died. Tedros Adhanom said a 9-year-old child was among the deceased patients. Now, for more on this, we have with us our correspondent Jody Cohen. Jody, what can you tell us about the reports that a new hostage release deal and accompanying humanitarian pause in the fighting could be on the table?
Over the weekend, there was a big rally in Tel Aviv, and people were calling there for the government to really prioritize trying to secure a hostage release deal for the more than 130 Israeli hostages that are still being kept in Gaza. Now, that was after the Israel Defense Forces mistakenly shot 3 of the hostages in Gaza, and the IDF said that Hamas has been setting traps for its soldiers, including using Hebrew and shooting at soldiers after appearing to surrender. Now, Minister Gantz has said that the top priority for the government is to try and secure the return of the remaining hostages, and that the second priority is to battle Hamas. But we do know that Israel believes that military pressure is the best way to secure that hostage deal. But according to Egyptian security sources who've spoken to Reuters, they say that Israel and Hamas are both open to a new deal. Hamas's precondition is for more aid to be allowed into Gaza, and Israel has opened the Kerem Shalom crossing between Israel and Gaza for more aid. But the Israeli spokesperson has repeatedly said that Israel is inspecting enough aid and that the bottleneck is with international agencies not getting the aid in, and also Hamas stealing the aid for its fighters. And in the latest Israeli media is showing a video which reportedly shows Hamas stealing aid trucks. In the meantime, we know that Mossad head David Barnett is going to be meeting with Qatar's Prime Minister for more talks on a potential deal, but it is expected to take time.
And Jody, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is going to be visiting Israel later on Monday, today, at around the same time as another UN Security Council resolution is likely to be voted on, calling for a ceasefire, vetoed on, to be calling for a ceasefire. Now, do you think that U.S. will use its veto again?
Right, so there have been growing calls for a ceasefire. Hamas says that more than 18,000 Gazans have been killed. Israel says that number includes more than 7,000 Hamas terrorists, that they target Hamas and not civilians, but that Hamas hides behind civilians, using them as human shields, including using ambulances for cover. And they say that they found weapons in baby incubators in hospitals. Israel set up 150 shelters, we know, and has produced an active map of the fighting. And White House spokesperson John Kirby has said that Israel's done possibly more than the US would have done to give advance warning of its strikes. The US, as you said, used its veto at the last UN Security Council resolution vote, which was calling for a ceasefire, and we've got another vote that's going to take place later on today. Whether or not the US will use its veto will really depend on the language. Israel and the United States has said that a ceasefire would keep Hamas in power, and the US wants to see the language amended on the cessation of hostilities. Meanwhile, Secretary Lloyd Austin is going to be in Israel later on Monday. No doubt they're going to be discussing this, also the timetable of the war, protecting civilians, and also reportedly a new maritime protection force that is said to be being set up after attacks on shipping by the Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen.
Pressure from its citizens to bring hostage negotiations back to the table. Anger and sorrow have been mounting in Israel after the IDF admitted to killing 3 hostages on Friday. Hostages were earlier freed during a week-long truce, also joined the protests or rallies and pressured Israeli authorities to ramp up efforts in bringing back the remaining hostages.
לפני 10 ימים הגעתי לפגישה עם חברי הקבינט, התחננתי בפני הקבינט, וכולנו הזהרנו שלחימה עלולה לגרום לפגיעה בחטופים. לצערי צדקתי. אני ניצלתי. אכן המתווה לשחרור החטופים היה נדחה בשבוע. אולי לא הייתי פה.
Thousands have gathered outside Israel's defense headquarters in Tel Aviv to protest the Israel military's action and call on the Netanyahu government to do more to release the hostages from Gaza. Protests and rallies rocked Tel Aviv. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has confirmed that a fresh round of hostage negotiations with Qatar's mediation is currently underway. This even as he said Israel would fight to the end. But the Israeli leader did not confirm reports of a meeting between Mossad head David Banya and Qatar Sheikh Mohammed bin Al Thani.
אנחנו פועלים גם עם קטר וגם עם מצרים. יש לנו ביקורת קשה על קטר. קטר עוד אני מניח תשמע עליה, אבל כרגע אנחנו מנסים להשלים את המהלך של שחרור חטופינו.
Asserted its position that the group will not come to the negotiation table until Israel stops bombarding in Gaza. A statement by the militant group revealed that its official position has been conveyed to all mediators. As domestic pressure in Israel escalates, there has also been a flurry of action on the diplomatic front. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is currently on a trip to West Asia. The trip, which begins in Israel, will also involve a visit to Qatar and Bahrain. Potential talks around the hostage situation, escalating death toll in Gaza, and rising maritime tensions in the Red Sea will be high on Lloyd's agenda. Meanwhile, the battleground in Gaza continues to remain tense and volatile. Israeli forces carried out a fresh wave of airstrikes on a UNRWA school in Khan Yunis. The victims were rushed to the nearby Nasser hospital for urgent medical care.
في الشمال أنا مدام بوصفوا المدارس اللي هناك بقول الأمان في الشمال ولا من هنا أنا خايف هنا بقول الأمان في الشمال فيش منطقة هنا.
Close to 19,000 Gazans have been killed since October 7th by Israeli airstrikes and ground offensive. 90% of Gaza has also been rendered homeless as Gaza continues to reel under a dire humanitarian crisis. The Kerem Shalom crossing between Israel and Gaza has now been opened to allow aid trucks into the enclave. Meanwhile, thousands of Gazans scrambled for food at the Rafah crossing. Till Saturday, Rafah border was the only entry point. The United Nations has raised concerns that over the quantum of supplies trickling into Gaza been equal to a drop in the ocean. Since the siege on Gaza, over 2.3 million Palestinians are battling hunger and homelessness. On the other hand, in the West Bank, tensions continue to escalate as Israeli military carries out raids in the region. According to reports by Palestinian Red Crescent Society, Israeli soldiers were seen blocking ambulances. An injured person is believed to have died in the New Shams camp after the ambulances were prevented from entering the area despite coordination through the Red Cross.
To begin with the top story, at the moment, Israeli military is considering plans to invade southern Lebanon, and this while risking further escalation in the ongoing conflict with Hamas. Now, despite calls for restraint from Western allies, Israel Defense Forces are planning to push Hezbollah forces north to the symbolic Litani River. Now, the river by a resolution in 2006. And the resolution required the removal of armed forces in Lebanon, which is north of the river. However, Hezbollah has still fortified the area, and they've justified this by claiming Israel's non-withdrawal from a disputed area in the Golan Heights. Now, the two sides have been exchanging artillery and missile fire since the start of the war in Gaza, and this has also raised concerns about the conflict spreading further. These concerns have been lowered by Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. He indicated a major offensive would only occur if provoked by Israel or if Hamas faced an overwhelming defeat. On the other hand, IDF spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan has emphasized that there is no return to the existing state of affairs, and this as the forces are already prepared and plans for their readiness have been defined. Now, Israeli politicians and military strategists also rejected an easy ceasefire with Hezbollah, and this has prompted a discussion within Israel's war cabinet on whether to launch a ground force, a decision which can prove to be very crucial for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Meanwhile, there is an ongoing internal debate within the war cabinet on how seriously to take this Hezbollah threat. While some believe that Hezbollah fears a political backlash in Lebanon, the IDF sees potential for limited in northern Israel.
And welcome. Let's take a look at our top story. Israeli military is considering plans to invade southern Lebanon. This while risking further escalation in the ongoing conflict with Hamas. Now, despite calls for restraint from Western allies, the Israel Defense Forces are planning to push Hezbollah forces north to the symbolic Litani River. The Litani River holds significance due to a UN ceasefire resolution in 2006. The resolution required the removal of armed forces in Lebanon north of the river. However, Hezbollah they have justified this by claiming Israel's non-withdrawal from a disputed area in the Golan Heights. The two sides have been exchanging artillery and missile fire since the start of the war in Gaza. This has also raised concerns about the conflict spreading further. But these concerns have been lowered by Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. He indicated a major offensive would only occur if provoked by Israel, or if Hamas faced an overwhelming defeat. On the other hand, the IDF spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, has emphasized that there is no returning to the this as their forces are already prepared and plans for the readiness have been defined. Moreover, Israeli politicians and military strategists also rejected an easy ceasefire with Hezbollah. Now, this has prompted a discussion within Israel's war cabinet on whether to launch a ground force or not, a decision which can prove to be crucial for Israeli. Meanwhile, there is an ongoing internal debate within the war cabinet on how seriously to take this Hezbollah threat. While some believe Hezbollah fears a political backlash in Lebanon, the IDF sees potential for limited attacks in northern Israel.
Whatever you do it for less at Harbor Freight.
Israel is facing immense pressure from its citizens to bring hostage negotiations back to the table. Anger and sorrow have been mounting in Israel after the IDF admitted to killing 3 hostages on Friday. Thousands gathered outside Israel's defense headquarters in Tel Aviv to protest the Israel military's action and call on the Netanyahu government to do more to release the hostages from Gaza. Hostages who were earlier freed during a week-long truce also joined the rally. Israeli authorities to ramp up efforts to bring back the remaining hostages.
We delve into the explosive events surrounding the FBI's storming of Jeffrey Epstein's private island known as Little St. James. This daring raid, conducted by federal agents, sent shockwaves through the world as they continue their relentless pursuit of the truth behind Epstein's alleged sex trafficking ring. Join us as we uncover the astonishing details of this investigation, exploring the mysterious circumstances surrounding Epstein's death for justice. Prepare to be captivated by the unbelievable facts and shocking revelations that will leave you questioning the dark secrets hidden within Epstein's island paradise. Let's dive into the heart of the story and uncover the truth behind this scandalous story. It was a sunny morning on Little St. James. Jeffrey Epstein's private island in the tranquil waters and picturesque scenery gave no hint of the dark secrets that lay hidden within its shores. But on that fateful day, everything was about to change. It was Monday morning, and the island was bustling with activity. Visitors and staff went about their daily routines, unaware of the storm that was about to descend upon them. Little did they know that the FBI had set their sights on this seemingly idyllic paradise. The events leading up to the FBI raid had been years in the making. Epstein, a wealthy financier with a network of powerful connections, had long been in a sinister web of sex trafficking. But it wasn't until his arrest on July 6, 2019, that the full extent of his alleged crimes began to come to light.
A registered sex offender who made a fortune as a hedge fund manager in the 1980s and 90s, known for his lavish lifestyle and high-profile connections. Jeffrey Epstein is facing new allegations that he exploited dozens of young girls for sex.
Steve Scully, an IT worker who had spent years on the island, came forward with shocking revelations about what he had witnessed during his time there. "I don't know if they were kids. They looked young to me," Scully told NBC News. Scully's testimony added fuel to the fire, further intensifying the public's desire for answers. The pressure mounted on law enforcement agencies to take action and bring Epstein and his alleged co-conspirators to justice.
I'm going to invoke my Fifth Amendment right. How many times have you solicited a minor for prostitution? Same answer.
The Epstein Task Force, led by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, took up the challenge. They meticulously gathered witnesses and built a case against Epstein and his associates. But the investigation hit a major roadblock when Epstein was found unresponsive in his cell at the Metropolitan New York City. His death sent shockwaves through the world, leaving many questioning the circumstances surrounding his demise.
Some breaking news right now. Disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein has taken his own life while he was behind bars here in New York City.
Despite Epstein's death, the investigation pressed on. The FBI was determined to uncover the truth and bring justice to the victims who had suffered at the hands of Epstein and his alleged FBI agents descended upon Little St. James, ready to unearth the dark secrets that lay hidden within its shores. The raid was a vivid display of their unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth and holding those responsible accountable. As the sun beat down on Little St. James, the FBI raid on Jeffrey Epstein's private island was about to unfold. The agents, armed with a search warrant, were determined to uncover the truth behind the alleged trafficking ring that had operated within the confines of this seemingly serene paradise. The raid began with a swarm of federal agents fanning out across the island in golf carts, their presence sending shockwaves through the staff and visitors who had been going about their daily routines. Kelly Quinn, the owner of Salty Dog Day Sales, a sailing charter in the area, found herself caught in the middle of the chaos. We were just trying to look at pretty fish and swim with turtles, and here we are in the middle of an FBI raid. This has been something on our radar for years. We're all really curious why it's happening now, Kelly Quinn said. The FBI agents wasted no time as they combed through Epstein's sprawling estate, searching for evidence that would shed light on the alleged crimes that had taken place there. The main residence, a 24,000 residence, became the focal point of the search. Agents meticulously scoured every room, looking for any trace of Epstein's illicit activities. It wasn't long before they stumbled upon a room that sent chills down their spines. The walls were adorned with photographs of young girls, some of them topless, as Steve Scully had previously described. The master bedroom, the office, and even the gymnasium were filled with these disturbing images, serving as a haunting reminder of the alleged exploitation that had taken place within these walls. But the discoveries didn't end there. As the agents continued their search, they stumbled upon a hidden underground complex that had remained concealed from prying eyes for years. This through a hidden entrance, revealed a network of rooms and corridors that seemed designed to facilitate Epstein's alleged illicit activities. The agents carefully documented every detail, taking photographs and collecting evidence that would later be crucial in building their case against Epstein and his alleged co-conspirators. The search extended beyond the main residence as the agents explored the rest of the island. They discovered additional structures, including a spa and 2 pools, which raised further questions about the nature of the activities that had taken place there. The raid on Epstein's private island was a vivid display of the FBI's determination to uncover the truth and bring justice to the victims. It was a pivotal moment in the investigation, as the agents gathered the evidence needed to dismantle the alleged sex trafficking ring. The search on Little St. James continued for several days, with the agents leaving no stone unturned. Every inch of the island was meticulously examined, ensuring that no crucial piece of evidence was overlooked. As the raid came to a left the island with a trove of evidence that would form the foundation of their case. The shocking discoveries made during the raid would send shockwaves through the world, exposing the dark underbelly of Epstein's private paradise. The FBI raid Epstein's private island sent shockwaves through the world, exposing the dark secrets that had been hidden within its shores. As the dust settled, the aftermath of the raid brought about a wave of legal proceedings, public outrage, and an ongoing fight for justice. The evidence gathered during the raid became the cornerstone of the legal case against Epstein and his alleged co-conspirators. The trove of photographs, documents, and testimonies provided a chilling glimpse into the alleged trafficking ring that had operated within the confines of the island. The legal proceedings that followed were complex and far-reaching. The Epstein Task Force, led by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, meticulously built their case, ensuring that no stone was left unturned. The charges against Epstein included sex trafficking and conspiracy, carrying a potential sentence of up to 45 years in prison. The case
Welcome to a world of free TV. Scroll for over 20 categories of movies, TV shows, news, and more. Plus, watch hundreds of movies and shows on demand. Great idea. Get ready to
This is an incident that our agencies train for.
Helsinki 1 hour, Senator. Is POTUS up and about yet?
POTUS status unknown, sir.
Actually, I heard him moving around just now. I think he's awake, sir. Sir. Morris. Good morning. Mr. President, sir. Oh, there we go again. 20 points down in the polls. Friends and enemies lining up to stab me in the back. Well, at least you're still in my corner. Right, Morris? Come on, you're not going to tell the First Lady, are you? Wheels down to Helsinki in an hour, sir. I'd rather take a bullet than go to another one of these conferences. That was insensitive. Say something like that to a man who actually took a bullet for me. Well, a near-death experience does change one's perspective on a few things, sir. Look, Morris, I'm really sorry they're forcing you to retire after this trip. I know how you feel. Mr. President, sir, one thing I have learned is that life is just too damn short not to have a cookie when you want one. See you in a half.
paradise. We got moose, we got bears, we got wolves, lynx, everything you need. So, what kind of game are you looking for? Big game. Roaches, skin again. 5 girls. Great. Land the helicopter. We haven't license to hunt here on this area. Just execute my order. Roaches,
Never seen a hunting team like this. I expect not. What you got there?
Something like scope.
Targeting system?
Targeting system.
What for? Right? Shoulder-mounted Chinese FN-6 surface-to-air missile, not the most advanced SAM on the market by any means, but more than capable of taking out passenger aircraft.
passenger aircraft, what do you mean?
With a state-of-the-art military-grade aircraft, the defense systems would most likely defect their tag. That is, the defense systems had somehow been disabled. Are you terrorists? You certainly look terrified, so I suppose we must be. But I don't think you should be worrying about us. You should be worrying about yourself. In fact, in my opinion, you should be running. Running? Absolutely. You see, I intend to kill you. You have no way of overpowering me, but I don't yet have a weapon in my hand, so your best chance is to run. Like this.
ABC of hunt. Beginners. Attracting deer to within your shooting range. This might be a little.
Avaisuuskaritoa. Siellä pitäisi olla punainen rasti.
Joo.
Se on meidän salaisuus. Vaikka jos se on niistä.
Onko siellä peuroja?
Aivan varmasti. Kun meitä sarvipäitä.
Hyvä. Niitä mä saan kutsua.
Lepää kunnolla. Ja aletat aamulla. Muista liikkua tuulen alapuolella. Ja kun valo nousee, se on paras hetki. Silloin sun pitää olla valmiina ampumaan.
Iskä. Mä teen parhaani.
Niin pitääkin.
Oh, hello. I'm just playing Monopoly Go. It's Monopoly on the go. Duh. It's so fun. Watch. Now I'm rolling. Okay. I'll take it. Now I'm building my cities. So many. Rio, New York, Moonville. Hey, what's happening? My friends are after my money. It's fine. I'll get them back. Take money to make money. Download Monopoly Go now. It's free and so much fun.
That's me, Grok. Last Super Bowl, I missed the FanDuel kick of destiny. It's nobody missed it. I don't kick. I catch. Because it wasn't enough for me to hold up a phone and say, now new customers bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets. So I'm going to a land of second chances, Vegas.
And this time you won't miss. Get in.
Get $150 in bonus bets. FanDuel Kick of Destiny 2 coming live Super Bowl Sunday.
Benzana.
No niin, näytä niille.
Ei jumalauta. Anna mennä nyt loppuun saakka.
Poika lähtee kotiin.
Ei lähde. Poika on valmis. Sä pidät puheen ihan normaalisti ja panet pojan metsälle.
Menkööt sitten. Häpeäs.
Hyvä.
Tässä pikkumiehessä virtaa metsästäjän veri. Poika seisoo nyt miesten edessä niin kuin teistä jokainen on joskus seissyt, valmiina jatkamaan perinnettä. Pojalla on päivä ja 1 yö aikaa selvittää, mikä hän on miehiään. Erämaasta, minkä metsä katsoo sopivaksi. Metsä on ankara tuomari. Se antaa jokaiselle sopivalla mitalla. Sitä pitää osata kuunnella. Ja saaliista on taisteltava kynsin hampain. Ilmaiseksi täältä ei saa mitään. Erämaahan lähtee poika, mutta takaisin tulee mies.
Sir?
John?
Power off.
Pandemic was verified. Evacuation protocols clearly triggered and a notice to stay behind sensor pictures. One country lost everything. All comms, radar, roadmaps, satellite signal gone. Mr. Vice President Owens introduced Fred Herbert as our longest serving field operating CNN Silver Hat. We've done female terrorist leads argument. General, if troopers start to fill Fred in on our known ones.
Mr. Herbert said 6 minutes ago we got a discuss signal from Air Force One last month in Atlanta at T-32. Air Force One and its entire fighter escort fell off the grid. We're over Finland, we're out to Helsinki for a pre-TA summit. Sir, you think this is the most serious terrorist action since 9/11? Just clear. All we know is this was a mechanical hit.
On 5 planes simultaneously.
One explodes, except that place is that slow. This was a stretch. I'm saying we don't want to rush to conclusions. Well, Ryan, why did that not do it? Some of the overwhelming service to our pursuit. And hell of you know that. Why did that not do it? How do you think it exploded?
Shoulder mounted SAMs can't reach passenger jet altitude.
Yeah. Planes landing trajectory. But at the point of firing, the high altitude, like the side of the mountain, the Air Force One will spin in every countermeasure known to man. From the guy on the inside. Disable him. Wait, use the jammer and EMP device. A screwdriver, a pair of pliers. What about getting him to man on critical slug? How can you penetrate the security that tight? I know. Money. Oh, God.
Any suggestions?
Well, then what? Find the president, kill some position or athlete. I don't know.
you show yourself, man? I broke her. Is this some kid I'm talking to? Yes. Yes, I come in peace. Wait, no, hang on. Could you please just come out? Whoa, kid, hey. Please, move the bowl now. You don't recognize me? I'm William Allen, President of the United States. I'm lost, and I could use your help. Yes, Mom. The house close by, town, small village. But where did you come from? You know, it must be something. I mean, did you just pop up out the ground?
Okay, so here's my most requested actors. Every other. You need vinegar, a large salad bowl, and hi. You tried new Tide fabric rinse? Tide fabric rinse? Right. It's not a detergent or a softener. It works in the grease maker to get clothes cleaner. That sounds way easier. Cool. Just pour it in wherever you put your fabric softener. Like deep odors, 3 cents better than detergent alone. Whoa. I love that. Help odor. Easy. Did you know most dish soaps don't remove all grease, even with scrubbing? What? I just try Dawn Platinum. It removes 99% of grease and food residue. That's why Dawn is trusted to save wildlife, protect the environment. Dawn Platinum cleans to the sweep.
Right, President? We're located in this contract. Sure. Situation's ended. Copy that, finish one security threat.
devices know better about an afternoon storm. Which leaves us with the greatest possibility. Lone wolf, trapped on his own journey. Streams of possible. Finally, that's
I'm a hunter. This is my role. With this, I can get this food and feed posterity. Yeah.
You want the bottle? Have you done it before?
No, but my dad has. And I do too. Best content there is. What? I call it something. And you call me Rick. No. Young man, I am the president of the United States. And I'm here on a mission. What could be greater than a national emergency? My birth. The birth. This is now the property of the United States of America. Got that? You don't have to understand that. Get off. What do you want? This is a big forest. You are control. My forest. My rule. Welcome to Finland.
It's like Maniac Detective Sunday. You got it right, folks. Let's not raise any alarm. Let details are nothing. The one that just put a big game story. One more thing, the live stream satellite coverage of this area. Well, we sort of assume that we don't have that. Wireless surveillance in Russia. Right, right. We do. Well, let's get those satellites pointed in the right direction. But then notice, I did notice, that I did take care of it. But then notice, how I had to very much notice, that I did take care of it. But then notice, how I had to very much notice, that I did take care of it. But then notice, how I had to very much notice, that I did take care of it. But then notice, how I had to very much notice, that I did take care of it. But then notice, how I had to very much notice, that I did take care of it. But then notice, how I had to very much notice, that I did take care of it. But then notice, how I had to very much notice, that I did take care of it. But then notice, how I had to very much notice, that I did take care of it. But then notice, how I had to very much notice, that I did take care of it. But then notice, how I had to very much notice, that I did take care of it. But then notice, how I had to very much notice, that I did take care of it. But then notice, how I had to very much notice, that I did take care of it. But then notice, how I had to very much notice, that I did take care of it. But then noti
when I give my address, what's the crack? And in fact, I'm terrified I'm going to be remembered in history as the president on the outside. What's that? Nobody knows. Me? President! What? That's you! Looks just like yours! It must be a lucky day!
yeah. That's weird. From my dad for me.
It's a reminder that you found me, you rescued me, you protected me. It's a reminder that it's fun. I don't think my plane crashed in the past. Planes were shot down, dead people. But we need to go on Sunday. If all you're not, if you go to me, no, it's far away from me.
What about you?
I can take care of myself.
Well, now, it is a small truth. As leader of the free world, I have to say, Mr. President, I'm impressed. How you managed to put up such a fight. So, you just need to know White House. Maybe none of this would have happened. Stop. Stop. Keep the boy out of it. Let's go. Sure. Yo, be wild. Whatever you are. Whatever you are.
Yeah, man. Go. Go now. Trust me, Holmes.
But the Army troops get here with their automatic weapons. Make you a spiteful. You bring faith to me first.
Not enough to get for warning.
That's all. That's all. I ran.
Then again, it goes to the demons, wives, children, you know what? I can actually let you down. Come on, breathe it. I might wow you.
Get lost.
Okay, so here's my most requested actors, among others. You'll need vinegar, a large salad bowl, and oh, hi, have you tried new Tide fabric rinse? Tide fabric rinse, right? It's not a detergent or a softener. It works in the rinse cycle to get clothes cleaner. That sounds way easier. Oh, just pour it in wherever you put your fabric softener. Like deep odors, it runs better than detergent alone. Whoa, I love that. Try new Tide fabric rinse. Rinse away tough odors. Easy. Did you know most dish soaps don't remove all the grease, even the scrubbing? What? I just Googled. Try Dawn Platinum. It removes 99% grease and food residue. That's why Dawn is trusted. Save wildlife, protect the environment. Dawn Platinum, clean it to the sweet.
Unidentified hello. That's identified. Keep zooming in. Now. That fuel's part. It's our bird. See that camera tracking off in the direction the hello is flying. Well, on our mountaintop. That's on it.
How is that? Anyone here got 90?
Well, I start to find out the logistics of dealing with the data. Apparently, we're getting stuck on this mountain. Best thing to avoid is as much as possible. You're gonna stop them? What else am I doing on you? You're sick. You're a very wealthy man. Transfer $10 million in your green bank. Something. What? Keep in your butts. First class is full. Where the hell are our Navy SEALs? I see 130.
reporter any moment now. I just backed the biggest prize on the planet. What his choice would be. No, not! No, not! We're not the guy that Louis! What did he say? God save us, so. Take him off. He's headed back this morning. Take him off. Nothing like a rescue call.
There's no one to help us. Not my dad. No one. We have to help ourselves. Instead of looking down, we have to feed us. I hope so.
Just found a crash site, therefore.
those GPS coordinates.
go